Welcome to Midnight Murmurs, your gateway to soothing mysteries and chilling whispers. I'm here to help you unwind and explore captivating tales that lurk in the shadows. Remember to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing where and when you're listening. Now, relax and let the night embrace you. I never imagined that a single envelope could upend the quiet rhythm of my life. It arrived on an overcast Tuesday morning, its cream-colored paper embossed with an unfamiliar seal. The letter, formal yet cryptic, informed me of an inheritance, a sprawling Victorian mansion in the remote village of Westbury, left to me by a distant relative whose name I scarcely recognized. As I held the letter, my pulse quickened with a mix of trepidation and reluctant curiosity. I wondered what ghosts of the past might be tethered to this long-forgotten estate. Traveling to Westbury was an exercise in uneasy anticipation. The road wound through rolling countryside that seemed almost too still, the occasional rustle of wind through barren trees echoing like whispered secrets. When I finally arrived at the outskirts of the village, an inexplicable chill ran down my spine. Westbury was not the quaint, cheerful place I'd imagined. Instead, it exuded a persistent, haunting melancholy. Narrow lanes curved past dilapidated cottages and fog-laden grave markers, and every step I took resonated with the weight of untold histories. At the far end of a narrow, winding lane stood the mansion, a towering relic of a bygone era. Even from a distance, its silhouette loomed ominously against a slate-gray sky. The structure, a grand testament to Victorian ambition, was marred by the relentless hand of decay. Ivy clung to its weathered stone walls like skeletal fingers, and the once polished windows now stared blankly, reflecting a ghostly, diffused light. As I approached, an inexplicable sensation of being observed prickled at the back of my neck, as though unseen eyes were tracking my every movement. Stepping through the wrought iron gates, I felt the cool, damp air of neglect envelop me. The pathway was cracked and overgrown, each step stirring up memories of a time when the estate must have buzzed with life. My boots crunched on gravel as I made my way to the imposing front doors. I hesitated for a moment at the threshold, grappling with an inner conflict between rational skepticism and an almost primal urge to flee from the unseen forces that seemed to lurk here. But curiosity, a stubborn, unyielding compulsion, propelled me forward. Inside, the mansion revealed a labyrinth of grandeur intermingled with disquieting decay. The entrance hall was vast, its ceilings adorned with faded murals and intricate plasterwork that hinted at lavish celebrations long past. Yet, the dust that blanketed every surface and the silence that hung heavy in the air spoke of years of abandonment. I walked slowly, each footstep stirring echoes on the creaking wooden floor, as if the mansion itself were sighing under the burden of its secrets. As I ventured deeper, subtle anomalies began to manifest. At first, it was a fleeting glimpse, a shadow darting across the periphery of my vision, gone before I could focus my eyes. Then came the whispers. They were not voices but murmurs, almost indistinguishable from the rustle of the wind. I paused in the corridor, straining to listen, but the sound dissipated as quickly as it had come. My heart pounded in time with the soft creaks of the ancient floorboards beneath me, each step accompanied by a symphony of groans from the building's very bones. I found myself in a grand parlor, where the remnants of opulence were juxtaposed with evident neglect. Faded portraits of stern ancestors lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow me with a melancholic vigilance. The heavy drapes, once a vibrant shade of burgundy, hung in tattered disarray, their rich fabric now a dull memory of their former splendor. As I traced the contours of an intricately carved mantelpiece with trembling fingers, I couldn't shake the sense that the house was alive in some unspoken way, its every crevice and shadow a silent witness to bygone sorrows. It wasn't long before I encountered another presence. In a narrow, dimly lit corridor leading to the service area, I met the caretaker. His name was Mr. Harding, a gaunt, taciturn man whose lined face and somber eyes hinted at decades of burdens carried in silence. His uniform, though neat, was faded, as if it, too, had absorbed the melancholy of this place. Without preamble, he began to speak in a hushed tone that seemed to merge with the ambient creaks of the old mansion. "You must be the inheritor," he said, his voice carrying a weight of resignation. "This place, it's not what it once was. There are stories here, things better left undisturbed." His gaze drifted to the heavy shadows pooling in the corners, and I sensed that his words were more than a mere warning. They were a lament, an elegy for a family steeped in sorrow and secrets. He mentioned, in fragments and with a hint of sorrowful irony, that the mansion bore witness to tragedies too numerous to recount. There was talk of lost souls, of familial discord, and a lingering darkness that had seeped into the very foundation of the estate. I pressed him gently for more details, but he only offered a cryptic smile and a soft, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Some things are better discovered in their own time," he murmured, as if the mansion itself was the keeper of its own timeline. His eyes, shadowed and knowing, lingered on mine before he silently retreated into the deeper recesses of the house, leaving me with a growing sense of both dread and determination. In that moment, standing amidst the faded glory and creeping decay of my newfound inheritance, a resolve took root within me. The mysterious legacy thrust upon me was not just a property, it was a puzzle, a labyrinth of secrets waiting to be unraveled. The whispers in the halls, the fleeting shadows, and the caretaker's sorrowful hints formed a tapestry of enigma that was impossible to ignore. I vowed to uncover the hidden truths of my family's past, to peel back the layers of neglect and mystery that enshrouded Westbury and its ill-fated mansion. Yet, even as I made this silent promise, the mansion seemed to respond. A sudden gust of wind, or perhaps an unseen presence, swept through the corridor, causing the tattered drapes to flutter and a cascade of dust to dance in the dim light. In that fleeting moment, I was overcome by a sensation of being intimately connected to the mansion's ancient soul, as if every creaking board and whispering draft was a beckon from a long-dead relative, urging me to listen, to remember, and to confront the secrets that had been buried for generations. Later that evening, as dusk bled into the inky blackness of night, I found myself alone in a modest guest room prepared by Mr. Harding. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and something indescribably musty, as though the very walls were exhaling memories of decay. Lying in the narrow bed, my mind raced with fragments of the day's encounters. I replayed the caretaker's somber warnings, the eerie sounds that had punctuated my solitary exploration, and the unnerving sensation that the mansion was watching me. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful. In the dim half-light of my dreams, I saw visions of figures moving silently in the corridors, their eyes full of longing and despair. I heard soft voices, perhaps echoes of the past, reciting lines of sorrowful verse that I couldn't fully grasp. At one point, I awoke with a start, drenched in sweat and a cold dread that clung to me like a second skin. The whispers, the shadows, the melancholic ambience of Westbury, they were all entwined in my consciousness, refusing to be dismissed as mere tricks of an overactive imagination. As dawn crept in, pale and uncertain, I resolved to begin my investigation into the mansion's past. The inheritance, with all its inherited grandeur and hidden decay, was a portal to a legacy steeped in mystery. I was determined to peel back its layers, to understand the roots of the darkness that seemed to permeate every stone and crevice. My mind teemed with questions. Who was this distant relative who had chosen me as the heir? What sorrowful secrets had scarred this once great estate? And what was the source of the unsettling presence that seemed to linger just at the edge of my vision? I knew that the path ahead would be fraught with uncertainty and, possibly, terror. Yet, the lure of the unknown was irresistible. As I prepared to leave the small guest room and begin a methodical exploration of the mansion's many rooms and hidden nooks, I steeled myself for the challenges to come. Every creak of the floor, every fleeting shadow, every whispered echo of voices past was a clue, a fragment of a larger, more sinister narrative that spanned generations. Before venturing out into the dim corridors once more, I paused by a large, ornate mirror hanging in a narrow hallway. My own reflection, pale and determined, seemed to merge with the distorted images behind me. It was as if the mirror was not merely reflecting me, but also the specters of the mansion's tragic history. I could almost feel the weight of ancestral eyes judging my every move, urging me to tread carefully, yet boldly, into the heart of this enigma. I stepped away from the mirror, my mind awash with a cocktail of dread and excitement. The mansion was more than a mere structure, it was a living testament to the passage of time, a silent witness to countless joys and sorrows. And now, it was mine to unravel. Each step I took echoed with the promise of revelation, of hidden stories waiting to be discovered beneath layers of dust and despair. In that moment, standing alone in the twilight of a forgotten era, I realized that my inheritance was not just a relic of the past, but a challenge thrown down by fate itself. The mansion's faded grandeur and creeping decay were mirrors of the fragmented family history that had been concealed for too long. And as I set out to confront these mysteries head-on, I could feel the stirring of something ancient and restless, a dark undercurrent that whispered of secrets yet to be fully unearthed. I left the quiet solace of the guest room, armed only with a lantern and my own wavering resolve, and began my tentative journey into the mansion's labyrinthine corridors. With every creak of the floor and every flicker of shadow at the edge of my vision, I was reminded that I was not alone in these halls. The presence of those who had walked these corridors long before me seemed to linger in every corner, urging me to uncover the truth of their demise and the legacy of sorrow that had befallen our bloodline. That night, as I ascended a narrow staircase toward the upper levels of the mansion, I could not shake the sensation that the house itself was breathing around me, a slow, rhythmic exhalation that merged with the steady beat of my heart. The staircase groaned under my weight, each step a reluctant confession of the mansion's own tired memories. I paused briefly on a landing, listening intently. The silence was nearly absolute, yet beneath it lay an undercurrent of sound, a soft, persistent murmur that might have been the sigh of wind, or perhaps something else entirely. At the top of the stairs, I found myself in a long corridor lined with closed doors, each one hiding its own tale of neglect and sorrow. I tried one door, half expecting resistance, but it swung open with an uncharacteristic ease, revealing a dusty library lined with shelves of forgotten books and yellowed letters. The air here was heavier, laden with the musty scent of aged paper and secrets that had long been confined to the dark recesses of time. I felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the sense that I had stumbled upon a trove of stories that the mansion had kept hidden for decades. I spent several hours perusing the titles and scanning the spines, searching for any reference to my family history, to the distant relative who had bequeathed this grim estate to me. The more I looked, the more I sensed that this library was a repository of unspoken memories, a place where grief and regret had been carefully catalogued alongside the mundane chronicles of everyday life. Every now and then, a soft rustle or the faintest whisper would brush past my ears, as if the very books were murmuring their own tales of woe. By the time I reluctantly emerged from the library, night had fully cloaked the mansion in darkness. The faint light of my lantern cast long, quivering shadows along the walls, and the building seemed to exhale a collective sigh as if acknowledging my intrusion. My mind was awash with conflicting emotions. On one hand, an insatiable desire to peel back the layers of this ancient mystery. On the other, a growing, visceral fear of what I might uncover. Each step into the deeper parts of the mansion was a step further into a past filled with spectral echoes and unspoken regrets. I returned to the main hall, where I encountered Mr. Harding once more. He stood silently by a grand staircase, his lined face half hidden in shadow. When our eyes met, I saw a flicker of something, an acknowledgement of shared secrets, perhaps, or a silent warning. "The mansion holds more than memories, miss," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the creaking wood and rustling drapes. "There are things here that should remain undisturbed." His words, laced with both sorrow and caution, sent a shiver down my spine. Yet, they only deepened my resolve. That night, lying awake in the solitude of my guest room, I could not help but wonder about the true nature of my inheritance. Was it merely an old mansion with a storied past, or was it a living, breathing entity, a vessel of sorrow, haunted by the weight of its own history? I felt drawn to it, compelled to discover the roots of the uncanny disturbances that had marked my first hours in Westbury. The shadows, the whispers, the creaking floors, each was a silent invitation to delve deeper into a legacy that was as much a part of me as it was of the mansion. I resolved that the coming days would be spent piecing together the fragmented history of this place. I would search for hidden diaries, old letters, and any clues that might explain the strange forces at work here. The mansion was not simply an inheritance of bricks and mortar, but a repository of my family's untold stories, a narrative of grief, mystery, and perhaps, redemption. I was determined to find the truth, no matter how unsettling it might be. As I drifted towards a restless sleep that night, the mansion seemed to murmur around me, a low, continuous hum that blended with the sound of my own heartbeat. I could almost swear that in the depths of that murmur lay a promise, that the secrets of the past, once unearthed, would forever alter the course of my future. And so, with a mixture of dread and resolve, I embraced the unknown, knowing that my journey into the heart of Westbury's mysteries had only just begun. In the silent pre-dawn hours, before the first rays of sunlight could break through the gloom, I sat at a small desk in my room and scribbled down the impressions of the day. My pen scratched fervently across the paper, capturing the spectral visions, the cryptic warnings, and the profound loneliness that pervaded the mansion's corridors. Every word was a step closer to understanding, a breadcrumb trail left by those who had come before me, beckoning me to follow the path they had once trod with equal measures of hope and despair. I ended my writing with a simple, resolute sentence: I will uncover the truth of this inheritance, no matter where it leads me. As the ink dried, the silence of the mansion seemed to answer with a resonant echo, leaving me with the unnerving sense that my journey was already intertwined with the fate of this cursed estate. Thus, with the first light of dawn filtering through dusty windows, I rose determined to confront the enigmas of Westbury. Every shadow held a secret, every whisper a clue, and I was prepared to chase them down into the deepest, darkest corners of my family's legacy. Little did I know that the mansion's true nature, its hidden tragedies and lingering specters, would soon push me to the brink of my own sanity, challenging every notion I held of reality and the supernatural. And so, the first chapter of my inheritance had been written, a prologue of quiet dread and simmering mystery, setting the stage for a journey that promised revelations both wondrous and horrifying. I stepped out into the chill morning air, the mansion's silent gaze following me, as if silently daring me to uncover the truth hidden within its decaying walls. The morning light filtered weakly through the grimy windows as I awoke to a hush that felt both oppressive and expectant. I had barely slept, haunted by dreams of disembodied voices and shifting silhouettes, when I resolved that today would be devoted to uncovering the mansion's secrets. The resolve I felt last night, mingled with an inexplicable compulsion to understand what lurked in these walls, guided my every step as I rose and prepared for another day in this enigmatic estate. After a meager breakfast in the shadowed dining hall, its long table set for guests who would never come, I began my exploration with the methodical determination of one piecing together a long-forgotten puzzle. I retraced my steps from the previous evening, determined to revisit the library, that silent sanctuary of neglected memories. I moved slowly, my footsteps a quiet counterpoint to the persistent creaks of the aging floorboards. The corridors, lined with closed doors and faded wallpaper, seemed to breathe with secrets as I passed, their silence inviting me to uncover hidden stories. In the library, amidst rows of dusty tomes and brittle letters, I noticed something peculiar. One shelf, far to the left, did not quite match the symmetry of its neighbors. As I traced my fingers along the spines of leather-bound volumes, I felt a subtle irregularity in the wood. Pressing gently, the shelf swung open with a muted groan, revealing a narrow, hidden passage behind it. My heart pounded in anticipation. This was no mere accident of design, it was a deliberate secret, hidden away for reasons unknown. I lit my lantern with trembling hands and stepped into the concealed corridor. The passage was barely wide enough to walk through, its walls lined with crumbling plaster and layers of dust that danced in the pale light. Every step seemed to echo the heartbeat of the mansion itself, resonating with the weight of forgotten memories. As I advanced, the temperature dropped noticeably, and a damp chill seeped into my bones. It was as if I were venturing not only into a hidden room, but into the very heart of the mansion's past, a past filled with sorrow and untold stories. I paused to steady myself, and that was when I noticed something else, a small, leather-bound diary, its cover embossed with faded initials that hinted at an ancestor long past. I took the diary in trembling hands, brushing away decades of accumulated dust. The pages were yellowed with age, their ink softened by time, yet the careful script leapt off the page with a fervor that belied the frailty of the medium. As I flipped through the entries, I discovered a narrative of anguish, secrets, and betrayals, a chronicle of a life steeped in regret and mystery. The diary belonged to an ancestor whose name I could barely pronounce, and within its pages lay fragmented tales of familial discord and whispered curses. The entries spoke of strange rituals, unexplained occurrences in the mansion, and a growing sense of dread that had plagued him in his final days. The further I read, the more I became aware of an unsettling presence. It was as if the words themselves carried a spectral residue, stirring something deep within the mansion. The quiet rustle of pages was soon joined by something far more disconcerting, a series of fleeting visions that began to dance at the edge of my awareness. I would catch a glimpse of a pale figure drifting past the doorway, or hear a faint sigh echo from an empty corner. At one moment, as I leaned over the diary to absorb another heart-wrenching passage, I felt an icy hand of dread curl around my heart. The room spun ever so slightly, and I blinked hard, certain that I had seen a reflection of sorrow in the mirror of my mind. It was as if the mansion's long-dead inhabitant was trying to communicate through the very fabric of time, a silent plea to be heard, understood, or perhaps forgiven. Deep in thought, I almost missed the sound of soft footsteps approaching. I turned, half expecting to see Mr. Harding, but instead, a woman emerged from the gloom at the far end of the corridor. She carried herself with an air of quiet determination, her eyes bright with an inquisitive spark that belied her gentle smile. "I'm Elena," she said, her voice as soft as the whisper of a breeze, yet carrying an undeniable strength. "I've come to help. After all, we share more than just a name." In that moment, I realized that she was my cousin, a distant relative whose existence I had scarcely known until now. Her presence was like a sudden burst of light in the oppressive gloom, and I felt an immediate kinship that promised both collaboration and unexpected revelations. Elena's eyes sparkled with both excitement and a touch of trepidation as she examined the diary in my hands. "I've heard whispers in town about the old mansion and its dark past," she murmured, as if recalling half-forgotten childhood stories. "They say that our family has long been entwined with mysteries that even time itself refuses to forget." We shared a moment of silent understanding, each of us realizing that the secrets of our ancestry ran deeper than either had imagined. It was as though fate had conspired to bring us together at this very juncture, to help each other navigate the treacherous waters of our shared heritage. With a mutual resolve, we decided that our next step would be to delve deeper into the history of the mansion and the legacy of our bloodline. Elena suggested that we speak with the local villagers, who, despite their reluctance to revisit the painful memories of Westbury's past, might hold key pieces of the puzzle. Later that afternoon, armed with the diary and an unyielding sense of purpose, we left the mansion's oppressive confines and made our way into the heart of the village. Westbury, with its narrow lanes and somber atmosphere, seemed almost to recoil as we entered. The villagers regarded us with wary glances, their expressions etched with the kind of guarded familiarity reserved for old, unresolved grief. In a small tea room at the village square, we met with Mrs. Cartwright, an elderly woman whose lined face and somber eyes had witnessed more than a lifetime of sorrow. Over steaming cups of bitter tea, she recounted tales of the mansion, stories that had been passed down through generations. According to her, the estate had once been the vibrant center of a proud family, but tragedy and misfortune had left deep scars. She spoke of eerie lights flickering in the windows on moonless nights, of anguished cries carried on the wind, and of a family curse that seemed to envelope the mansion like a shroud. Her voice trembled as she recalled how the mansion's opulence had given way to despair. "They say that the house remembers," she whispered, leaning in as if confiding a sacred secret. "It holds the sorrow of every soul that has ever walked its halls." Elena and I exchanged a glance, both of us absorbing the weight of her words. It was clear that the mansion was more than just stone and mortar, it was a living repository of ancient grief, a silent witness to the tragedies that had marred our family's history. Our conversation with Mrs. Cartwright left us with more questions than answers. Back at the mansion, as twilight began to settle over the estate, we resumed our exploration with renewed urgency. The hidden passage I had discovered earlier beckoned us once again, its secretive embrace promising further revelations. With Elena by my side, we ventured into its depths, our lanterns casting quivering shadows against walls that seemed to whisper of hidden corridors and forgotten chambers. The passage led us to a small, secluded room that appeared to have been a private study. There, nestled amongst scattered papers and faded photographs, we found more fragments of a narrative that was as elusive as it was compelling. Alongside the diary, there were several loose pages filled with cryptic notes and hastily scrawled sketches, a map of sorts, hinting at other hidden rooms and passageways within the mansion. Elena's eyes widened as she examined the map. This looks like a blueprint of the house," she said in awe. "There are markings here for rooms that aren't on any official layout. It's as if someone wanted to keep their secrets hidden away." The realization that the mansion was a labyrinth of concealed spaces sent a shiver down my spine. With each new discovery, I felt the sense of an unseen presence intensify, as if the very walls were aware of our intrusion and were reluctantly revealing their hidden past. That night, as darkness enveloped the mansion and the wind howled outside like the lament of a forsaken soul, the disturbances grew bolder. What had been subtle whispers and fleeting shadows in the days before now manifested as definite sounds, footsteps in empty corridors, low murmurs echoing in the silence, and sudden, inexplicable cold drafts that swept through rooms without warning. I found myself lying awake in the guest room, the diary clutched tightly in my hands, as the mansion's nightly symphony of creaks and whispers played on. The intensity of the paranormal occurrences was unlike anything I had experienced before. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the blurred faces of long-departed ancestors, their eyes pleading for acknowledgement or perhaps warning me of the danger in delving too deep. There were moments when I swore I saw a figure standing at the foot of my bed, a spectral presence with eyes that glowed with a sorrowful luminescence, before it vanished as silently as it had appeared. In the midst of these unsettling events, Elena and I formed a plan. We agreed that our next course of action was to meticulously document every strange occurrence, every inexplicable sound, every hidden room we uncovered. Our exploration was no longer just a quest for our family's forgotten history. It had transformed into a desperate attempt to understand the supernatural forces that bound our destiny to this forsaken mansion. With notebooks in hand and our minds sharpened by equal parts fear and resolve, we scoured every corner of the house. One particularly harrowing evening, while Elena and I were investigating a narrow, dust-choked corridor near the mansion's rear, I experienced an overwhelming vision that left me trembling. The world around me melted away into darkness, and for a brief moment, I found myself transported to a time long past. In this vision, I witnessed a grand ball held in one of the mansion's opulent rooms, a scene of extravagant splendor abruptly marred by an inexplicable dread. The revelers, clad in elaborate costumes, appeared as ghostly silhouettes dancing in slow motion, their laughter distorted into anguished wails. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, but its impact lingered, leaving me with the unmistakable impression that the mansion's history was as alive as our own hearts. The following day, determined to glean more concrete answers, we revisited the study room. Elena carefully unfolded a brittle envelope that had been tucked behind a row of old journals. Inside lay a set of letters, correspondence exchanged between family members whose words hinted at a growing unease and a gradual descent into despair. The letters spoke of strange happenings within the house, unexplained noises, flickering lights in unoccupied rooms, and an insidious presence that seemed to prey on the vulnerable. The language was both intimate and cryptic, and as I read, I could feel a creeping dread settle in the pit of my stomach. Each line was imbued with a sense of foreboding, as though the writers had sensed that something terrible was looming on the horizon. That evening, after we had painstakingly transcribed the contents of the letters and compared them with the diary entries, Elena and I sat together in the quiet of the mansion's parlor. The room, dimly lit by our flickering lanterns, seemed to exhale a melancholic sigh as we pored over our findings. "Our family's history is steeped in sorrow and mystery," Elena whispered, her voice tinged with both sorrow and determination. "These letters, these entries, they're not just personal grievances. They're warnings." I nodded, feeling the gravity of her words settle like a weight upon my heart. The mansion, with its labyrinthine corridors and hidden secrets, was more than just an inheritance. It was a living memorial to the tragedies that had plagued our bloodline for generations. As the night deepened, the disturbances within the mansion grew ever more insistent. The usual symphony of creaks and distant murmurs now seemed to crescendo into something more defined, a series of deliberate sounds that echoed through the halls. I found myself compelled to follow these auditory clues, each step taking me deeper into parts of the house that I had not yet dared to explore. The sensation of being led by an unseen hand was both unnerving and strangely invigorating. It was as though the mansion itself was guiding me to the very heart of its dark past. In one such moment of hushed intensity, I discovered a narrow doorway tucked behind a tattered curtain in one of the lesser-known corridors. With a mixture of trepidation and resolve, I pushed it open to reveal a small chamber that appeared to have been sealed off for decades. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and decayed wood. On a dusty table lay an assortment of relics, a faded family portrait, a delicate porcelain figurine, and an intricately carved wooden box that seemed to pulsate with a quiet energy. I hesitated before opening the box, as if fearing that its contents might unleash another torrent of spectral revelations. But curiosity won over caution, and I gently lifted the lid. Within the box, wrapped in a piece of faded silk, was another set of documents, a collection of meticulously written notes and sketches that appeared to map out the secret passageways of the mansion. The sketches were detailed, marking hidden rooms, concealed doors, and even what looked like underground tunnels that extended far beyond the confines of the main house. My mind raced as I realized that these documents could be the key to unraveling the full extent of the mansion's mysteries. Elena, who had been studying the letters by my side, looked up with wide eyes. "This is incredible," she murmured. "Our ancestors went to great lengths to hide something, or to protect us from something." Her words resonated deeply, stirring a mix of admiration for our forebears' resourcefulness and a gnawing fear of what had been hidden away all this time. The following days blurred into a relentless cycle of exploration, documentation, and uneasy reflection. Each room we uncovered, each diary entry we deciphered, painted a progressively darker picture of a family tormented by forces beyond their control. The mansion was not just a relic of the past, it was a canvas upon which centuries of sorrow, betrayal, and supernatural influence had been meticulously painted. Elena and I began to realize that the strange occurrences were not random but were intricately connected to the lives of those who had once called this place home. Late one rainy evening, as I sat by a small window watching the rain carve new paths down the cracked glass, I heard a sound that chilled me to the bone. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere deep within the walls, a deliberate, almost mournful beat that seemed to echo the pulse of a long-forgotten heart. The sound drew me away from the safety of my seat and down into the depths of the mansion, where I discovered yet another hidden room. This one was more expansive than the others, a secret study, perhaps, that had once been the nerve center of our family's inner circle. The walls here were lined with portraits and shelves filled with arcane books whose spines hinted at esoteric knowledge. As I stepped inside, the door creaked shut behind me with a finality that sent a jolt of terror through my veins. In that suffocating moment, I realized that every step I took was a step further into a labyrinth of shadows, where the past was never truly at rest. Elena soon joined me in the study, and together we pored over a particularly cryptic passage from one of the books. It described an ancient ritual and a curse that had allegedly bound our family to the mansion's spectral inhabitants. Though the language was archaic and filled with metaphor, its message was unmistakable. There were forces at work here that transcended the boundaries of life and death, forces that had seeped into the very soul of the mansion. My hands shook as I read the passage aloud, each word reverberating in the silent chamber as though it were a spell cast across time. Elena's eyes, filled with a mixture of wonder and dread, met mine as we both acknowledged that we were standing at the crossroads of history and the supernatural. In the days that followed, the mansion's nightly disturbances escalated. Shadows moved with intent, and the low murmurs in the corridors grew into almost articulate whispers, as if the very walls were attempting to communicate their centuries-old secrets. Each night brought new manifestations, flickering lights in deserted rooms, disembodied voices that seemed to call my name, and visions that left me gasping for breath in the darkness. The experience was at once mesmerizing and horrifying, as if the mansion were drawing us inexorably into a vortex of past and present, blurring the line between memory and reality. Yet, amidst the terror and uncertainty, there was a strange solace in the fact that Elena and I were not alone in this journey. Our shared determination forged a bond that lent strength to our investigation. Together, we began to chart a map of the mansion, marking the locations of hidden doors, secret passageways, and the sites of the most intense paranormal activity. We spent hours in whispered discussions, our voices merging with the creaks and sighs of the ancient structure, as we tried to piece together a narrative that spanned generations. It was a task that required not only intellectual rigor but also an unyielding emotional resilience in the face of the unknown. One particularly stormy night, as lightning split the sky and thunder rattled the very foundations of the mansion, we gathered our notes and huddled together in the study. The atmosphere was charged, heavy with anticipation and the unspoken acknowledgement that we were nearing the heart of the mystery. "There is something here," I said softly, almost to myself, as I traced a trembling finger along one of the sketches. "Something that has been trying to speak to us all along." Elena nodded, her gaze fixed on a passage in the diary that hinted at a hidden truth buried within these walls. "Our family's past is not just history," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm outside. "It's alive, pulsing beneath the surface of this mansion, waiting for us to unlock its secrets." In that charged moment, as the wind howled and the mansion shuddered under the force of the tempest, I felt a renewed determination to see this journey through. Every discovery, every eerie encounter, every hidden message in the diary and letters was a thread in a tapestry that was slowly revealing itself. The mansion, with its labyrinth of rooms and corridors, was no longer just a physical space, it was a repository of our collective memories, our fears, and our hopes for understanding. And so, as the storm raged on outside and the mansion whispered its secrets into the darkness, I made a silent vow. I would not rest until every hidden room had been explored, every diary entry and cryptic note had been deciphered, and every echo of the past had been brought to light. The shadows of the past were no longer content to remain hidden, they were reaching out to me, beckoning me to join their eternal dance of memory and mystery. As dawn broke once more over Westbury, casting a pale light on the rain-washed landscape, I looked out of the study's narrow window with a heart both heavy and hopeful. Elena sat by my side, her presence a constant reminder that I was not alone in this journey. The mansion, with all its secrets and spectral inhabitants, had become a part of me, a living chronicle of pain, beauty, and a legacy that was as much about the past as it was about the uncertain future. The investigation had only just begun, and already the path ahead promised revelations that would test the very limits of our understanding. With each secret uncovered, the mansion whispered louder, urging us to remember, to forgive, and to confront the darkness that had haunted our family for generations. And as I stepped out into the cool, uncertain morning, I carried with me the weight of every word, every vision, and every silent promise made in the darkness, a promise to uncover the truth of our past, no matter the cost. In that moment, as the first rays of sunlight struggled against the lingering gloom, I realized that the mansion was more than a mere building, it was a gateway, a mirror reflecting the collective grief and hopes of those who had come before me. The shadows of the past, once hidden in the recesses of forgotten rooms, were now a part of my own journey, beckoning me deeper into a mystery that was as timeless as it was haunting. And I knew that whatever secrets lay hidden in the labyrinth of Westbury's legacy, I was determined to bring them into the light. The dawn broke with a pale, hesitant light that scarcely pierced the heavy gloom of the mansion. I awoke with a lingering unease, a residue of nightmares and disjointed visions that had haunted my sleep. Every creak of the ancient floorboards and every distant murmur seemed to beckon me toward an inevitable confrontation with the past. Elena and I had resolved to delve deeper into the mysteries we'd uncovered. Now, armed with the diary, loose letters, and hastily sketched maps, we began the arduous process of deciphering our family's long-forgotten history. In the quiet solitude of the study, I pored over several faded letters that we had salvaged from between the brittle pages of old journals. Their ink, though softened by time, conveyed a palpable intensity, a narrative of bitter disputes, whispered accusations, and unspeakable betrayals. The letters spoke in a tone that was equal parts regret and admonition, hinting at a deep-rooted animosity that had long since festered within our family. As I read, I could almost feel the weight of each word, as if the very syllables were cursed, marking each reader with the legacy of our ancestors' sorrow. Elena hovered beside me, her eyes scanning the cramped lines of script as if seeking confirmation of her own dark suspicions. "These aren't ordinary family squabbles," she murmured, her voice trembling with both fear and determination. "They speak of a betrayal, a moment of catastrophic loss that forever changed the course of our lineage." I nodded, my heart pounding as I recalled the passage that explicitly mentioned a curse that, once invoked, seemed to wrap its tendrils around our family with an unyielding grip. The turning point, however, came when a heavy knock echoed through the study's thick silence. I looked up, startled, as the ancient door creaked open and in stepped a man whose presence was as commanding as it was reluctant. His eyes, dark and troubled, met mine with a mixture of sorrow and resignation. It was Uncle Vincent, the very figure who, until now, had lurked in the periphery of our fragmented family narrative. "Vincent," I greeted him cautiously, my voice betraying the turmoil that churned within. His expression, though guarded, held a flicker of relief, an acknowledgement that perhaps the time had come to unburden himself of secrets long hidden in the shadows of Westbury. He hesitated, as if weighing the cost of revealing painful truths. "I know you seek answers," he began, his voice low and gravelly, "but some memories are best left undisturbed." I could see the lines of grief etched into his face and the way his eyes seemed to avert the full force of his own recollections. Yet, the raw urgency in his tone compelled me to press on. "Uncle Vincent," I urged softly, "our family's history is entwined with this curse. We cannot move forward without knowing what truly happened." His eyes finally met mine, stormy and conflicted, and after a long moment of silence he spoke again. "There was a time," he whispered, "when our family stood united in pride and fortune. But pride, as you well know, is a dangerous companion. It bred envy and suspicion among us, culminating in a night of betrayal that shattered the very foundations of our legacy." His words faltered as a distant memory resurfaced. It was my Uncle Richard who fell victim to that treachery. He was a man of honor, yet the greed and malice of others led him to a fate most cruel. Uncle Vincent's confession sent a chill racing down my spine. The letters and diary entries that we had examined earlier now took on a sinister clarity. The documents described heated disputes over wealth, power, and love, elements that ignited a spark of rebellion and vengeance. In one letter, written in a hurried, almost panicked hand, the writer warned of a curse that would befall anyone who dared to betray the family. The curse was described not as a mere superstition, but as a living, malignant force that would exact retribution for the sins of the past. Vincent continued, his voice laced with regret, "They say that on that fateful night, before Richard's untimely end, an oath was sworn, a dark rite performed in secret. The words of that oath were etched in blood, and its power was such that it still lingers in these walls." His gaze wandered as if he could see the scene unfold before him, a grand hall filled with revelers whose faces twisted with greed and malice, culminating in an act of violence so profound that it left an indelible mark on our family's soul. Even as Vincent's words echoed in the dim light of the study, a heavy silence descended upon us, a silence thick with the knowledge that the mansion itself was a witness to these ancient misdeeds. The atmosphere grew stifling, as though the very air were imbued with centuries of unspoken sorrow and retribution. I sensed that the curse, long relegated to myth, was now a tangible, oppressive presence that would not be ignored. After what seemed like an eternity, Uncle Vincent reluctantly added, "I have tried for years to forget, to bury these memories beneath layers of time and pain. But it appears that the past refuses to remain buried." His admission was met with a deep, mournful sigh that resonated through the room. For a moment, I saw a glimmer of vulnerability behind his guarded demeanor, a glimpse of the man who had borne the burden of our family's sins for far too long. With the letters and Uncle Vincent's reluctant confessions echoing in my mind, Elena and I knew that our quest had only just begun. We needed to understand the full extent of the curse and how it had been woven into the fabric of our family history. The next step was clear. We had to venture beyond the confines of the mansion's decaying walls and explore the very grounds upon which our ancestors had lived and died. Later that afternoon, with a heavy heart and a determined spirit, we stepped out into the estate's grounds. The air was cool and damp, the chill of impending revelation palpable with every step. We followed a narrow, overgrown path that led to the graveyard, a sprawling collection of weathered tombstones, half swallowed by creeping ivy in the relentless march of time. The graveyard exuded a solemn, almost forbidding aura, as though it were a sanctuary for those whose lives had been snuffed out in darkness. As we moved cautiously among the ancient markers, I found myself drawn to one particularly imposing tombstone. The engraved name Eleanor was nearly erased by time, yet I could discern a date that stretched back centuries, a time when the family's fortunes were still untainted by betrayal. Kneeling beside the stone, I brushed away layers of moss and dirt, and as I did so, a sudden cold draft swept over me. In that fleeting moment, I was overwhelmed by a vision, a grand candlelit ballroom filled with spectral figures, the echo of anguished cries, and a young woman with eyes wide with terror, fleeing into the obscurity of night. The vivid images seared themselves into my mind, and I was forced to sit back, heart pounding, struggling to reconcile the beauty of a bygone era with the horror that had unfolded. Elena's gentle touch on my shoulder pulled me from the depths of my reverie. "What did you see?" she whispered, her voice soft and laden with concern. I hesitated, the fragments of the vision elusive yet potent. I saw a tragedy, something that tied Eleanor's fate to our family's curse, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. The weight of her question and the implications of my own words left us both in a state of suspended dread. Our exploration of the graveyard continued with measured steps, each of us acutely aware of the presence of unseen watchers. The ancient mausoleums and crumbling tombs seemed to murmur secrets of lost souls and eternal regrets. Uncle Vincent, who had joined us on this somber pilgrimage, halted before a particularly elaborate mausoleum, its carved stone depicting scenes of anguish and betrayal. "This mausoleum belongs to my Uncle Richard," he confided, his tone heavy with remorse. "It was he who paid the ultimate price for the greed and treachery of those who came after him." The silence that followed his words was as crushing as the tombstone itself, each of us lost in the gravity of a legacy marred by despair. As dusk began to settle over the estate, the light grew dim and the line between past and present blurred further. I could feel the mansion's oppressive energy even in the open air, a reminder that the curse was not confined to hidden rooms and overgrown graveyards, but seeped into every stone and shadow of the property. Elena and I exchanged grave glances, silently acknowledging that the more we uncovered, the more we were drawn into a vortex of ancestral pain and unresolved grief. Back at the mansion, after our return from the graveyard, we gathered our notes and documents, trying to weave together the disparate threads of history that now converged in a tapestry of betrayal and sorrow. The letters, once cryptic and disjointed, now painted a clearer picture. They spoke of clandestine meetings, bitter rivalries, and, most disturbingly, of a ritual, a dark ceremony performed in a hidden chapel within the mansion. One particularly damning letter detailed a fateful night when a heated dispute escalated into violence, culminating in an act of retribution so severe that the curse was said to be born from it. The language of that letter was frenzied and desperate, its words nearly illegible in places, as though the writer had been overcome by fear. Phrases like, "blood must be spilled," and "the curse is our inheritance," punctuated the page, sending shivers down my spine. I felt a pressing need to know more. If we were ever to lift the veil of darkness that hung over our family, we had to locate this hidden chapel and uncover the secrets it guarded. Elena, ever methodical and resolute, suggested that we map the mansion once again, using the sketches and clues we painstakingly collected. "Look at these markings," she said, pointing to one of the old diagrams that detailed secret passageways and rooms omitted from the official blueprints. "There is a room here that seems to be designated for sacred rites, a hidden chapel perhaps. If we can find it, we might piece together the final steps of the ritual described in the letters." I agreed, though the prospect of venturing into a place so intimately connected with our family's darkest hour both terrified and compelled me. That night, as a storm gathered beyond the mansion's weathered walls, we prepared to set out in search of the chapel. The mansion, alive with a symphony of creaks and distant, mournful whispers, seemed to brace itself for the storm both outside and within our hearts. The hours that followed were a chaotic blur of whispered discussions, frantic note-taking, and the slow, deliberate exploration of every hidden corner of the mansion. With Uncle Vincent's reluctant guidance and the spectral echoes of our ancestors urging us onward, we combed through long-forgotten corridors and behind secret panels. The air grew thick with the scent of damp decay and the faint, underlying odor of incense, a remnant, perhaps, of the ancient ceremonies performed in the hidden sanctum. In a narrow passage behind a decrepit tapestry, we discovered a door that was inconspicuously set into the wall. The wood was darkened by time, and intricate carvings, almost indecipherable in the low light, hinted at symbols of protection and damnation. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, feeling the oppressive weight of centuries of secrets pressing in on all sides. With a cautious turn, the door swung open to reveal a small, somber chapel. The chamber was illuminated by the muted glow of stained glass that filtered in through a single, high window. Dust motes danced in the beams of light, and the air was redolent with the scent of old prayers and forgotten rites. Inside, the chapel was sparse. A single wooden altar dominated the space, its surface worn smooth by the passage of countless hands. The walls were adorned with faded religious iconography, images that had once inspired hope but now seemed to serve as silent witnesses to the tragedies that had unfolded here. It was here, in this secluded sanctuary of sorrow, that the letters had led us. I could almost sense that the very air vibrated with the echoes of voices long past, each one a lament for a life betrayed and a future cursed. I knelt before the altar, feeling an almost overwhelming compulsion to read the inscriptions etched into its surface. Faint Latin phrases, barely visible under layers of grime, hinted at ancient incantations and prayers for deliverance. The presence in the room was tangible, a mix of despair, longing, and a warning that the secrets of that fateful night were not to be taken lightly. Elena joined me, her hand gently resting on my shoulder. "We are standing in the heart of our family's darkness," she said quietly, her eyes reflecting both fear and an unwavering resolve to know the truth. The discovery of the chapel was a turning point, a dark revelation that confirmed what the letters had so desperately hinted at, a ritual performed on a night of betrayal, the blood of an innocent spilled in a fit of retribution, and the subsequent curse that had bound our family for generations. As we lingered in that forsaken space, I felt the presence of Eleanor, of Richard, and of all those whose lives had been marred by the ancient sin. Their silent testimonies reverberated through the cold stone walls, urging us to unearth every hidden truth, no matter how painful. When I finally left the chapel that night, the storm had abated to a mournful drizzle. I returned to the mansion with a heavy heart, burdened by the realization that our family's darkest hour was not an event confined to myth, but a living specter that haunted every corridor and every grave. The letters and diaries had converged into a single, horrifying narrative, a narrative of betrayal, of vengeance, and of a curse that continued to claim its due. Back in my guest room, I spread the documents across a rickety desk and sat in the dim light, the fragments of history merging into a coherent, though chilling, story. Uncle Vincent's somber recounting, the spectral visions in the graveyard, and the dire warnings in the letters painted a picture of a night when darkness fell upon our family, a night that would forever alter our fate. I resolved that our next steps must be taken with utmost caution. The more we uncovered, the deeper we would be drawn into a vortex of ancestral despair. Yet, even amid the encroaching darkness, a part of me felt an odd solace. Understanding the genesis of the curse, however painful, was the only path to redemption, or at least, to a semblance of peace. With Elena's unwavering support and Uncle Vincent's reluctant aid, I knew that we had taken our first steps into the labyrinth of our family's most hidden truths. Every document, every whispered memory, was a key to a door that had long remained locked by fear and silence. That night, as I lay awake listening to the soft hum of the mansion, a low, persistent murmur that seemed to echo the heartbeat of generations, I made a silent vow. I would not rest until every dark revelation was brought to light, until the curse was understood in all its cruel complexity. The mansion was not merely an inheritance of brick and mortar, but a repository of our family's most agonizing secrets. And though the path ahead promised to be fraught with peril and despair, I knew that I must follow it to its bitter end. In the quiet, haunted hours before dawn, I scribbled in my journal. The truth is a dark and winding road, and tonight I stand at its threshold. May the voices of the past guide me, and may the curse that haunts us be laid bare. I must know the truth, even if it condemns me to walk this path alone. Thus, as the first light of a new day crept in through the tattered curtains of my guest room, I rose with a heart heavy with foreboding and determination. The dark revelations of yesterday had set the stage for an even more perilous journey into the heart of our family's tragedy. And though the mansion and its accursed legacy loomed large around me, I knew that I had no choice but to press onward, guided by the desperate hope that understanding our past might one day free us from its relentless grip. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper on the wind, now carried the echoes of ancient sorrow, and with each passing moment, the spectral line between memory and reality blurred ever further. I, too, was becoming a part of the mansion's lament, destined to uncover the layers of betrayal and despair that had long been concealed within its decaying walls. And as I stepped out into the uncertain light of day, I felt the silent promise of retribution, the inexorable pull of the curse, and the unyielding drive to confront a legacy too monstrous to ignore. In that resolve, I understood that the journey was not merely about uncovering hidden truths, it was about facing the dark reflections of our own souls, the inescapable shadows cast by the sins of those who came before. And though the path ahead promised both revelation and ruin, I knew that I must traverse it, step by agonizing step, until the final secrets of this cursed inheritance were laid bare. Thus ended another chapter in the dark revelations of our legacy, a chapter of whispered confessions, spectral visions, and the unrelenting quest for truth. The night was far from over, and as I drifted into a troubled sleep, the echoes of the past continued their mournful dirge, a reminder that some secrets, once unearthed, never truly die. Underscore 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 underscore. And so, with every new revelation, the curse tightened its grip on us, a relentless shadow in the corridors of time. The dark legacy of betrayal and sorrow beckoned us further into its depths, promising both the agony of truth and the hope of liberation. I was no longer merely an inheritor of a crumbling mansion, but a reluctant custodian of a history that demanded to be told, a history steeped in darkness, yet bearing the fragile promise of redemption. I awoke the next morning with a heavy, unyielding weight on my chest, a premonition that the dark legacy we had begun to unravel was about to reveal even deeper scars. The events of the hidden chapel and the anguished confessions of Uncle Vincent still echoed in my mind. As I sat by the narrow window in my guest room, watching the pale light struggle against the remnants of night, I knew that our journey into the family's haunted past was far from over. There were further layers to peel back, more secrets to unearth, and above all, an insidious betrayal that had been simmering beneath the surface for generations. Elena had been restless throughout the night, her sleep punctuated by muffled cries and gasps. I found her pacing in the corridor outside my room, her eyes dark with a mixture of determination and dread. "I had a vision again," she whispered as I approached. This time, it was clearer than before. She paused at a heavy, worn door that had long since been sealed off, her hand trembling as she pressed it to her cheek. I saw a family divided, siblings at war, their faces contorted with rage and sorrow. There was blood, and so much betrayal. Her voice, usually steady and reassuring, now trembled with a raw intensity that spoke of something deeply personal and ancient. I led her back to the study, where the remnants of yesterday's discoveries lay scattered on the rickety desk. The faded diary, the brittle letters, and the cryptic sketches all testified to an internal strife that had once torn our family apart. As I carefully unfolded one of the diaries, its cover cracked and stained with time, I realized that this particular volume belonged to an ancestor whose pen had bled the truth of a conflict long buried. The entries were feverish, filled with bitter resentment and expressions of jealousy that pointed to a long-standing sibling rivalry. Each page seemed to cry out in anguish, recounting how ambitions had divided kin, leaving behind not only emotional scars but also the seeds of a curse. I read aloud from the diary, my voice barely rising above a whisper. "I have seen the darkest parts of our souls this night. My own flesh betrays me as I watch my brother succumb to envy and malice. In our feud, we have doomed our lineage to a fate most cruel, a curse that will bind us in torment for all eternity." The words sent a shiver through me. Here, in the trembling script of a long-departed relative, was a confession of guilt and a dire warning. Elena's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she listened. This betrayal, it wasn't just a quarrel. It was the spark that ignited the curse, she murmured, almost to herself. "The more I see in my visions, the more I understand that our ancestors' sins are far from forgiven." Later that afternoon, Uncle Vincent joined us in the study. His usually guarded expression was softened by a haunted sadness, and he hesitated as if burdened by the need to disclose truths he had kept hidden for too long. "There is more you must know," he said slowly, settling into the creaking armchair by the window. Our family's conflicts ran deeper than petty squabbles. They were fueled by ambition, lust for power, and a bitter rivalry between siblings whose enmity would ultimately tear the family asunder. I leaned forward, heart pounding with anticipation and trepidation. "Tell us, Uncle Vincent," I urged, "what exactly happened that fateful night that you mentioned, the night that cursed our bloodline?" He stared into the distance, his eyes distant and clouded by memories of long-forgotten sorrow. It was my own uncle, Richard, a man of honor in a time of decadence, who became the unwitting victim of betrayal. His own brother, consumed by jealousy, conspired with others to seize control of what he believed was rightfully his. In the chaos that followed, a violent confrontation ensued. Richard was slain, and with his death, a dark ritual was performed in the secret chapel, a ritual meant to bind our family to a fate of perpetual retribution. His voice dropped to a nearly inaudible murmur as he continued, "I was young then, and I have spent my life carrying the weight of that sin, a legacy of betrayal that haunts us still." The confession hung in the air like a specter. I felt my pulse quicken, not only from the shock of the revelation but also from the realization that the curse was more than just a myth. It was the result of a calculated act of treachery that had set our lineage on a doomed course. Elena, her eyes reflecting the turmoil within, asked softly, "Do you know what became of the other brother? The one who betrayed Richard?" Uncle Vincent's face darkened, and he hesitated before replying. He vanished into obscurity, leaving behind only whispers of his treachery. Some say he was consumed by the very curse he helped create. Others believe he still roams these halls, a restless spirit bound by guilt. As dusk approached, an oppressive silence settled over the mansion. The revelations of the day had cast long shadows over our hearts, and the air seemed to pulse with the echoes of ancient grievances. I found myself drawn back to the diary, its pages now a tapestry of both confession and curse. In one particularly fervent entry, the writer described a relic, an object imbued with the very essence of the curse. The passage read, "In the hidden recesses of our ancestral home lies a relic, a medallion of tarnished silver, etched with symbols of power and despair. It was the token of our betrayal, the physical manifestation of our collective sin. Guard it well, for in its presence, the echoes of our treachery resound, binding us to a fate of eternal sorrow." The description ignited a spark of hope and terror in equal measure. If such a relic existed, it might hold the key to understanding the curse, and perhaps even a means to break it. With renewed determination, Elena and I resolved to search the mansion for any sign of this hidden object. Our search took us deep into the labyrinth of forgotten corridors and neglected rooms. The mansion seemed to resist our probing, its walls whispering warnings in voices too faint to decipher. Hours turned into an endless quest as we explored dusty attics, secret nooks behind crumbling paneling, and narrow passageways that twisted and turned like the threads of a long-lost tapestry. Finally, in a secluded alcove near the base of a spiraling staircase, we discovered a small, ornate box tucked behind a loose brick. Its surface was adorned with intricate carvings of intertwined vines and mysterious symbols, a design that resonated with the description in the diary. I felt a tremor run through my fingers as I lifted the lid. Inside lay a tarnished medallion, its silver dulled by time but unmistakably marked with the cryptic engravings described in the diary. The medallion exuded a subtle, almost imperceptible energy that sent a chill racing down my spine. I held it up to the light, watching as the symbols seemed to shift and writhe beneath the surface, as if alive with a malevolent will. Elena's voice broke the silence. "This must be it, the relic that binds our family to this curse." The gravity of our discovery was not lost on either of us. We both sensed that the medallion was not merely a historical artifact but a vessel of accumulated guilt and sorrow, a tangible reminder of the betrayal that had shattered our family long ago. I tucked the medallion carefully into my pocket, feeling its weight as if it were a physical manifestation of our shared burden. That night, as I lay in my guest room trying to muster the courage to face what the medallion might unleash, I felt a deep, unshakable disturbance within me. My dreams were invaded by vivid scenes of ancestral strife, a spectral theater of betrayal that played out in rapid succession. I saw the faces of long-dead relatives contorted in anger and despair. I heard the clash of voices as bitter accusations and anguished pleas filled the air. At the center of it all was the visage of a man whose eyes burned with jealousy, and whose hands were stained with the blood of his kin. The vision was so intense that I awoke with a gasp, the medallion clutched tightly in my hand as if it were the only link to a reality I could scarcely comprehend. In the days that followed, the mansion seemed to shift once more. The corridors grew colder, and the whispering voices became more insistent, as though the very walls were mourning the ancient betrayal. Elena, too, was visibly affected. Her once steady gaze now held a haunted quality, and she often found herself staring blankly at shadows, lost in the recesses of her own turbulent visions. One afternoon, while we were re-examining the map we had pieced together from the scattered documents, Elena suddenly gasped and pointed toward a section of the mansion that had so far eluded our attention, a hidden door behind an ancient tapestry in the main hall. The tapestry, depicting a grand scene of a bygone era, had hung undisturbed for as long as I could remember. Its rich colors, though faded by time, still conveyed a sense of opulence and hidden stories. With hesitant hands, Elena pulled the tapestry aside, revealing a narrow, almost imperceptible door carved directly into the wall. My heart hammered in my chest as I exchanged a look with her, a silent agreement that we had to explore this newly discovered passage. With the medallion in my pocket and a lantern in hand, I carefully eased the door open. It groaned in protest, its hinges creaking as if reluctant to reveal the secrets it guarded. Beyond the threshold lay a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. Every step we took felt like a descent into the depths of our family's guilt and sorrow. The air grew damp and heavy with the smell of earth and decay, and each footfall echoed like the toll of a funeral bell. At the bottom of the stairs, we emerged into a vast, subterranean chamber. The space was cavernous, its walls lined with rows of old stone shelves and relics that appeared to have been carefully preserved over the centuries. In the center of the chamber, beneath a shattered skylight that let in weak, silvery light, stood a stone pedestal upon which rested a weathered tome and a series of intricate symbols carved into the surface of the stone floor. The chamber exuded an aura of ancient authority and lingering sorrow, a sanctum of secrets long sealed away from the prying eyes of the world above. I approached the pedestal with a mixture of trepidation and awe. The tome, bound in cracked leather and inscribed with faded calligraphy, seemed to pulsate with the energy of a past too potent to ignore. As I gently opened it, the pages revealed accounts of familial strife, intricate rituals, and the dark ceremonies that had been performed in secret. The text was written in a language that mingled archaic phrases with cryptic symbols, a record of the rites that had invoked the curse. My eyes widened as I realized that these pages held not only the historical narrative of betrayal but also detailed instructions for a ritual that promised, if attempted, to sever the curse's hold on our bloodline. Before I could delve deeper into the manuscript, Elena's voice echoed in the chamber. "There's something else," she called, her tone a mixture of excitement and apprehension. I turned to see her kneeling by a small alcove near one end of the chamber. There, half buried under a pile of dusty relics, lay a delicate object wrapped in a scrap of faded cloth. I hurried over and helped her uncover it. The object was a small, intricately wrought pendant, fashioned in the shape of an eye and set with a single, dull gemstone. As I held it, I felt a sudden surge of emotion, a deep, ancient sorrow mingled with a fierce, almost defiant hope. It was as if the pendant was a silent witness to the family's myriad transgressions, an artifact born from the same betrayal that had cursed us, yet perhaps offering a glimmer of absolution. Elena's eyes met mine, and in that moment we both understood that these relics, the medallion and the pendant, were not isolated objects but intertwined keys to the dark legacy that bound us. They were physical embodiments of the echoes of betrayal, each charged with the remnants of a past that refused to be forgotten. I carefully placed the pendant alongside the medallion on a small cloth, feeling the combined weight of our ancestors' misdeeds and the possibility of redemption. As we sat in the silence of the secret chamber, the gravity of our discoveries began to settle in. The diaries had spoken of a betrayal so profound that it had splintered our family, and now we held in our hands the tangible remnants of that ancient strife. The relics seemed to whisper their own stories, of sibling rivalry turned deadly, of ambitions that spiraled into madness, and of rituals that had bound our fate to a cycle of endless sorrow. The chamber, with its cavernous darkness and the scattered artifacts of a bygone era, felt like the final repository of our family's most forbidden secrets. Every stone, every relic, bore the mark of a betrayal that had left no soul unscathed. I felt the presence of those long-departed spirits, their sorrow and fury intertwining with our own as we sought to piece together the puzzle of our shared heritage. In that moment, I resolved that we must document every detail, the inscriptions in the tome, the peculiar symbols on the floor, even the faint, echoing murmurs that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Elena and I spent hours meticulously copying the texts and sketching the intricate designs, determined to preserve the knowledge that might one day offer us a path to break the curse. Our work was punctuated by intermittent flashes of memory and emotion, sudden, inexplicable pangs of grief, or the overwhelming sensation of being watched by unseen eyes, as if the very ghosts of our ancestors were bearing silent witness to our quest. By the time we emerged from the secret chamber, night had once again claimed the mansion. The cool air outside was laced with a quiet menace, and the familiar sounds of creaking wood and distant whispers accompanied our cautious steps back through the labyrinthine corridors. Every shadow and every echo reminded me that the past was not easily left behind, that it clung to us, relentlessly, with every step we took. Later that night, as I sat in my guest room with the medallion and the pendant lying on the table before me, I felt the full force of the betrayal that had defined our family's legacy. The pages of the tome, now transcribed in my journal, painted a picture of ancient sibling rivalry, a discord that had sown seeds of envy and treachery, culminating in an act so violent that it birthed a curse meant to last for all time. I could not help but wonder, could understanding this betrayal, and confronting the relics of that dark act, ever lead to forgiveness or even redemption? Elena, who had stayed in the adjoining room, joined me quietly. "I still see it," she confessed, her voice barely audible in the dim light. "In my dreams, the faces of our ancestors are tormented by their own actions. I see the betrayal over and over again, as if it is a wound that refuses to heal." Her words, laden with sorrow, resonated with the despair I felt in the pit of my stomach. Yet beneath that despair lay a steely determination, a conviction that we must continue to confront the legacy of betrayal, however painful it might be. In the quiet that followed, as the mansion creaked around us and the ghosts of our ancestors whispered their laments, I made a solemn vow. I would not allow our family's dark past to define our future. Armed with the knowledge gleaned from diaries, letters, and relics, I was determined to piece together the shattered mosaic of our lineage, to understand the depths of betrayal, to confront the echoes of ancient sins, and ultimately, to seek a path toward absolution, even if that path led us deeper into the heart of darkness. That night, as I finally drifted into a restless sleep, I clutched the medallion and pendant to my chest, feeling their cold, unyielding presence as a reminder of what had been lost and what still might be redeemed. The mansion's whispers, the spectral visions, and the unresolved anger of ages past mingled with my own troubled dreams, binding me irrevocably to a legacy of sorrow and, perhaps, hope. In the days to come, I knew that the road ahead would be fraught with further revelations and even greater personal peril. But as I stared into the depths of that ancient darkness, I resolved to face every echo of betrayal head-on, determined that the truth, even if steeped in blood and regret, would ultimately set us free. And so, with the relics of our cursed inheritance as both burden and beacon, I embraced the looming uncertainty, ready to confront the deepest scars of my family's tragic history. A palpable shift in the mansion's atmosphere had taken hold during the restless night following our discoveries. I awoke before dawn to an eerie silence that was almost too complete, a silence that seemed to press in from every corner of the old estate. But even in that oppressive quiet, I could sense the gathering storm of supernatural activity, like the calm before a tempest that promised to tear the veil between our world and something far more dangerous. As I stepped from my guest room into the yawning corridors, I noticed that the very air seemed to tremble with anticipation. Faint, dissonant echoes, more insistent than the previous night's whispers, rippled along the walls, their cadence growing steadily into something reminiscent of a low, foreboding chant. My heart pounded, matching the rhythm of those disembodied sounds, and I found myself unable to shake the feeling that the mansion itself was bracing for an impending outburst of the inexplicable. Elena met me in the study, her face etched with concern and exhaustion from yet another night haunted by disturbing visions. "I haven't slept a wink," she confided in a hushed tone, her eyes reflecting both fear and determination. "The air feels charged, as though it's waiting for something." Uncle Vincent, who had been poring over the fragile pages of the ancient tome we had discovered, looked up with a troubled expression. His voice, gravelly and heavy with remorse, added, "There are forces at work here that we have only begun to comprehend. The unrest, it's not just a resurgence of old memories. It's something far more violent." Before we could gather our scattered thoughts, a sudden, violent gust of wind rattled the windows and sent shards of dust swirling in the gloom. The sound of creaking wood and distant, anguished cries reverberated through the corridors, as if the very foundation of the mansion were protesting centuries of buried sin. I clutched the medallion and the pendant in my hands, the cold metal a stark reminder of the betrayal that had once cursed our family, and now seemed to pulse with a dangerous, almost sentient energy. In the study, we huddled together around the tome, its yellowed pages now a roadmap of ancient rituals and incomplete ceremonies. Elena's finger traced a series of intricate symbols that detailed a ritual meant to break the curse, a ritual that, according to the text, had been left unfinished on that fateful night of betrayal. "It seems our ancestors believed that the curse could be undone if the ritual were completed properly," she said, her voice trembling as she read aloud an incantation in archaic Latin. "But something went wrong, the ritual was interrupted, leaving behind an unstable force that now manifests with growing hostility." Uncle Vincent's eyes darkened as he recalled his memories. "There were attempts in the past," he murmured, "to complete the ceremony. But each attempt met with disaster, as if the curse itself resented any effort to break it." His tone held both regret and a resigned sorrow, and it was clear that he had borne the weight of those failed attempts all his life. As we debated the implications of the incomplete ritual, the atmosphere outside the study shifted dramatically. The once muted supernatural occurrences began to crescendo into a violent storm of inexplicable phenomena. Shadows coalesced into twisted, contorted shapes that scuttled along the walls, and the soft murmurs transformed into guttural roars that echoed in every empty room. At one point, a heavy, spectral presence swept through the corridor, its force nearly knocking me off balance as I stepped back in alarm. I found myself alone for a brief, terrifying moment when the door to the study creaked open on its own, revealing a dark figure at its threshold. For an agonizing few seconds, I was paralyzed with fear. The figure's eyes glowed with an eerie luminescence, and its form seemed to shift and distort in a way that defied logic. With a surge of adrenaline, I staggered back, the medallion still clutched tightly in my hand. The figure dissipated into a cascade of shadow and light, leaving behind a silence that was heavier than before, a silence punctuated by my own racing heartbeat. When I rejoined Elena and Uncle Vincent, the tension between us was almost tangible. The relentless onslaught of supernatural energy had exposed not only the mansion's dark heart but also the fissures within our own fragile alliance. Elena's eyes flickered with both fear and a burgeoning suspicion, as if she wondered whether our shared quest for truth might be doomed by our inability to trust one another completely. Uncle Vincent, for his part, seemed burdened by secrets he was unwilling, or perhaps unable, to share fully, and I could sense an undercurrent of blame in his tone when he spoke of the past. Despite the rising discord, we recognized that we were at a critical juncture. Our research, the incomplete ritual, and the mounting supernatural phenomena converged to form a single, terrifying possibility. If we did not act soon, the curse would unleash its full, destructive potential upon us. Reluctantly, we agreed that our next step must be to piece together every scrap of historical record we could find, letters, diaries, and hidden notes that might illuminate the precise details of the ritual and the nature of the unfinished incantation. Over the following days, we dedicated ourselves to scouring the mansion for every reference to the past attempts to break the curse. In dusty corners of the library and secret compartments behind faded portraits, we unearthed fragments of accounts written in hurried, desperate script. One brittle, moth-eaten notebook, hidden behind a row of decaying ledgers, described an elaborate ceremony conducted by a previous generation. The writer detailed the gathering of key family members, the drawing of arcane symbols in blood on the mansion's floor, and the invocation of ancestral spirits, all in a bid to reverse the course of the curse. Yet, as the entry ended abruptly in a scrawl of ink and desperation, it was clear that something had interrupted the process, leaving a void where resolution should have been. As we painstakingly pieced together these historical records, the supernatural disturbances grew ever more violent. The mansion itself seemed to rebel against our intrusion, its walls trembling as if in protest. In one harrowing incident, while Elena and I were cataloging our findings in the library, the room was plunged into darkness as a violent surge of energy sent books and papers spiraling into the air. In that moment of utter chaos, I found myself face to face with a spectral force, a swirling mass of shadow and malice that reached out with claw-like tendrils. I barely had time to react, my instincts urging me to flee. The force struck with a cold, paralyzing grip that nearly pulled me into its depths. With a desperate cry, I broke free and staggered out of the library, my heart pounding as though it would burst from my chest. The incident left me shaken to my core. I realized, with a dawning horror, that the manifestations of the curse were not mere echoes of a troubled past. They were violent, almost vindictive, and driven by a force that was growing ever more unstable. It became clear that the incomplete ritual had left the curse in a state of limbo, an uncontrolled energy that was now spiraling toward catastrophic release. Each supernatural encounter was a reminder that time was running out, and that our efforts to understand and, if possible, neutralize the curse had to accelerate. The tension between Elena, Uncle Vincent, and me reached a fever pitch. In the quiet aftermath of one particularly intense encounter, as we gathered in the study to discuss our next steps, harsh words were exchanged. Elena's voice trembled with a mix of anger and desperation. How can we trust that we're doing the right thing? Every step we take seems to unleash more terror. Her eyes, usually so warm and resolute, were now shadowed with doubt. Uncle Vincent's face hardened as he replied, "You think I want this burden? I have carried it all my life, and every failed attempt has only fanned the flames of our misfortune." I struggled to mediate, torn between the duty to our ancestors and the instinct for self-preservation. "We must work together," I pleaded, "or this curse will destroy us all." In that moment, the storm outside seemed to mirror our inner turmoil. The mansion shook with renewed force, as if protesting our discord. Thunder roared overhead, and lightning illuminated the corridors in stark, terrifying flashes. The violent interplay of light and shadow cast monstrous shapes that danced along the walls, fueling our fear and our resolve. It was as if the very fabric of reality was fraying, pulled taut by the unresolved sins of the past. Determined to find a way forward, we resolved to recreate the conditions of the incomplete ritual, carefully reconstructing the steps that had once promised to break the curse. We gathered the relics we had found, the medallion, the pendant, and the weathered tome that detailed the ritual's intricacies. According to the ancient instructions, the ceremony required not only these physical objects but also the unburdening of old grudges and the collective confession of one's deepest sins. The ritual was not merely a mechanical incantation, it was a spiritual confrontation with the very heart of our family's darkness. We set up our makeshift altar in the mansion's grand parlor, a room that had once been the epicenter of both joy and despair. Faded portraits of our ancestors lined the walls, their eyes now seeming to watch our every move with a mixture of sorrow and accusation. With trembling hands, I arranged the relics on the altar, the medallion and pendant glinting dully in the flickering candlelight. Elena recited passages from the tome while Uncle Vincent muttered prayers in a voice that trembled with regret. The incantation, spoken in archaic Latin and accompanied by our shared confessions, sent shivers down my spine as it reverberated through the oppressive silence. For a few agonizing moments, it felt as though the mansion itself held its breath. Then, the air erupted in a violent maelstrom of supernatural energy. A deafening cacophony of spectral wails, crashing sounds, and the clatter of ancient relics filled the room. The very walls seemed to tremble with the force of it, as if the past were finally coming undone. In that chaos, I glimpsed visions of our ancestors, their faces contorted in agony, reaching out with desperate, spectral hands. The scene was so vivid that for an instant I lost all sense of time, caught in the grip of a torrent of memory and madness. It was then that the ritual, which had seemed our only hope of quelling the curse, turned treacherous. The uncontrolled energy surged toward me, its intent unmistakable. In a moment of pure terror, I found myself thrust backward as a force, a mass of seething, shadowy energy, swept across the room. I struggled to my feet, my senses overwhelmed by the rush of cold, biting wind that seemed to tear through the very fabric of my being. Elena's cry rang out in the tumult, and Uncle Vincent reached for me, his face a mask of both determination and despair. The confrontation with that spectral force left me shaken, my heart pounding as if in defiance of the storm raging around us. In the aftermath, the room fell into an eerie, suffocating silence. The relics lay scattered, the altar now a chaotic jumble of symbols and broken promises. We stood there, breathless and disoriented, the reality of the curse's destructive power laid bare before us. It was clear that our attempt to complete the ritual had not brought about the hoped for peace. Instead, it had exposed us to a violence we could scarcely control. As the initial shock subsided, we gathered ourselves to assess the damage. The incantation, the relics, even our confessions, all of it seemed to have backfired, unleashing forces that now threatened to consume us. Elena's eyes burned with tears and fury as she whispered, "We must have missed something. The instructions, they were incomplete. There's a part of the ritual we haven't uncovered." Uncle Vincent, his voice low and pained, added, "Perhaps the curse was never meant to be broken by us. Every attempt in the past ended in tragedy because we never fully understood the cost." In that charged moment, standing amid the remnants of our desperate attempt to halt the storm, I resolved that we would not let fear paralyze us. The path forward was fraught with peril, but if we were to save ourselves, and perhaps even our tormented lineage, we had to embrace the darkness head-on. With renewed determination, I proposed that we take a more measured approach, to re-examine the ancient texts, consult every hidden record in the mansion, and, most importantly, to confront our own personal demons that might be fueling the curse. The following days passed in a feverish blur of research and introspection. We scoured every forgotten corner of the mansion for clues that could reveal the missing elements of the ritual. In the depths of the library, behind a loose panel in a rarely visited archive, we uncovered a crumbling scroll that contained a previously unknown addendum to the ritual's instructions. The scroll spoke of the need for a final act of sacrifice, not one of blood, but of emotional absolution. It required that each participant confront the source of their personal guilt, to lay bare their deepest wounds before the spectral forces of our ancestry. Only by doing so could the ritual be completed and the curse subdued. Armed with this revelation, we returned to the grand parlor one last time. This time, the air was still heavy with anticipation, but tempered by a cautious hope. In a solemn circle, with the medallion and pendant arranged carefully on the altar, we prepared ourselves for the final confrontation. One by one, we recounted our darkest memories, unsaid regrets, buried resentments, and the silent sorrow of unacknowledged betrayal. The act was excruciating, a raw unburdening of secrets that had long festered in our hearts. As our voices melded into a single, anguished litany, the mansion's oppressive silence began to yield, as if acknowledging our willingness to face our own inner demons. For a long, breathless moment, nothing stirred. Then, as if in answer to our collective catharsis, the spectral energies in the room began to recede. The violent manifestations of the curse softened into a more subdued, almost mournful presence. The final words of the incantation, spoken together in a trembling harmony, resonated through the chamber, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the oppressive storm of supernatural force seemed to abate. In the quiet that followed, we were left exhausted yet strangely hopeful. The ritual, though incomplete in its initial attempt, had provided us with a glimpse of a possible path to redemption. It was clear that the curse would not be broken by force alone, but by an honest reckoning with our past, and perhaps, by finally finding forgiveness for the betrayals that had cursed our bloodline. That night, as I retired to my guest room with a heavy heart and a mind still reeling from the day's events, I felt the tremors of the gathering storm recede into a tentative calm. The mansion, though scarred by our desperate attempt, now seemed to exhale a long-held breath, a momentary respite before the next inevitable surge of its haunted legacy. I clutched the medallion and pendant, relics of our shared sorrow and hope, and resolved that we would continue this perilous quest, no matter the cost. In the days to come, our research would demand more sacrifices, both emotional and physical, and test the fragile bonds between us. Yet, amid the mounting tension and the ever-present threat of the supernatural, a seed of determination had been planted. We had glimpsed the possibility of subduing the curse, of transforming our shared legacy of betrayal into something that might finally pave the way for redemption. As I prepared for sleep that night, I scribbled in my journal. Asterisk, the storm is gathering, and its fury is both our enemy and our guide. In the chaos of our past and the violent echoes of our guilt, there lies the possibility of absolution. We must face the darkness within ourselves to quell the tempest without. Asterisk. And so, with the promise of a gathering storm, and the uncertain hope that its fury might ultimately give way to calm, I braced myself for the next phase of our journey. The battle to break the curse was far from over, and each step forward would demand that we confront the sins of our ancestors, and our own, in equal measure. Yet, in that silent promise of resilience and resolve, I sensed that we were finally on the threshold of understanding the true nature of our cursed inheritance. The path ahead was dark, the cost unknown, but there was no turning back now. We had gathered the storm of our past, and as it raged around us, we were determined to harness its power, to transform betrayal into a new beginning, even if that meant facing the full, unyielding wrath of the supernatural forces we had so long feared. Thus, with hearts steeled and souls laid bare, we stepped into the tempest of our destiny, united in purpose, though divided by the scars of yesterday, and ready to challenge the curse that had bound our family for generations. In the eerie calm that followed the tumultuous ritual, a strange and lingering silence settled over the mansion. That night, I lay awake in my guest room, the chill of the earlier storm still lingering in the air, as if the very walls had inhaled a long-held breath. In the oppressive quiet, I sensed that something was stirring beneath the surface, a presence that sought not to destroy, but to communicate. Sleep, when it finally came, was tormented by vivid, surreal visions. In these dreams, ancestral figures emerged from the mists of time, their eyes filled with sorrow and longing. I found myself standing in a vast, spectral hall where the light was soft and otherworldly. There, the voices of my ancestors spoke in gentle, yet urgent tones, urging me to listen. Their whispers carried the weight of centuries, a litany of regrets, betrayals, and unspoken truths that begged to be understood. I awoke with a start, my heart hammering in my chest. The echoes of those voices still resonated in my ears, their messages half remembered yet profoundly stirring. In the dim light of early dawn, I could almost discern the outlines of figures hovering at the edge of my vision, a faded parade of spectral presences whose murmurs intertwined with the creaking of the old mansion. Determined to decipher these cryptic messages, I sought out Elena. I found her in the library, poring over a stack of brittle documents by the weak light of a single lamp. As soon as our eyes met, she whispered, "I've seen them too. The voices, they're calling out to us." Her voice was hushed, laden with both fear and wonder. In that moment, we realized that our individual visions were threads in a tapestry that stretched back through the ages, a tapestry woven from the hopes and despairs of those who had once called this mansion home. That day, while the mansion itself seemed to breathe a slow, rhythmic lament, I began to document my dreams in a battered journal. Each entry was filled with details, the echo of a long-forgotten hymn, a vision of a gaunt figure with piercing eyes, and cryptic words in an archaic tongue that hinted at the origins of our family's bitter legacy. I felt as though I were both an observer and a participant in a dialogue between the living and the dead. As dusk fell, Elena approached me with a discovery that made her hands tremble. Hidden within a loose floorboard of a neglected corridor, she had uncovered a series of faded, handwritten pages. They appeared to be fragments of a personal memoir, written in the hurried scrawl of an ancestor whose name had been almost entirely lost to time. The entries recounted the tragic origins of our family's curse, tales of deep-seated grudges and a primordial betrayal that went beyond mere sibling rivalry. The memoir spoke of love turned to envy, of promises shattered by ambition, and of a ritual performed under the cover of darkness that had bound our kin to a fate of endless torment. "Elena," I said, my voice trembling as I read the passages aloud, this is the origin of everything. It is the bitterness that seeded our curse." The words were heavy, each sentence a reminder that the sins of the past were not confined to the realm of myth but were living specters that haunted our every step. Our conversation was abruptly interrupted by the sound of soft footsteps echoing down the corridor. Uncle Vincent emerged from the shadows, his face drawn and weary. There was a depth in his eyes that I had not seen before, a sorrow that went beyond the remorse of past failures. "There is more you must know," he said quietly, as though the weight of his confession had been building for years. "Our family's dark past is not merely about betrayal for gain, it is rooted in a primordial wound, a fracture in our bloodline that was fanned by fear and mistrust." He led us to a small sitting room tucked away behind a hidden door in the mansion's east wing. There, in the half-light of a dying fire, Vincent recounted stories that had never before been spoken aloud. He spoke of a time when our ancestors held fast to beliefs that bordered on the mystical, a time when every slight, every moment of envy, was magnified into a cosmic imbalance. "I have kept these memories locked away," he admitted, afraid that the truth would shatter what little peace we had. "But now, with the curse growing stronger, I see that understanding our origins is the only way to confront it." As Vincent's narrative unfolded, the voices in my dreams grew louder and more insistent. I began to see flashes of another era, a time when candlelit halls echoed with fervent prayers and desperate cries. In one particularly powerful vision, I stood in a ruined chapel much like the secret sanctum we had discovered. There, bathed in spectral light, I witnessed an ethereal assembly of figures. They spoke not in words, but in emotions, a profound mixture of anguish, hope, and an abiding plea for redemption. I sensed that these were not malevolent spirits, but the restless souls of those who had been wronged by the original betrayal. Yet the revelations were not confined to my own visions. Elena soon found herself targeted by supernatural manifestations that played upon her deepest fears. In the dead of night, while she was alone in the library, the air grew suddenly frigid, and the shadows on the walls began to writhe. A disembodied voice, soft and accusing, whispered her name in a language she could not understand. The voice dredged up memories of a childhood spent in isolation, of moments when she felt invisible and unloved. In that harrowing confrontation with her own past, she collapsed into a trembling heap of whispered fears and desperate resolve. When I found her, her eyes were wide with terror, yet amidst her tears, a spark of determination shone through. "It's as if the curse knows our weaknesses," she gasped, "and uses them against us, forcing us to confront our own inner demons." Uncle Vincent was not spared either. One evening, as he wandered the echoing halls alone, he was beset by a spectral presence that took the form of his long-departed father, a man he had both revered and feared. In that harrowing encounter, Vincent was forced to relive the shame and regret of a lifetime spent denying the truths of his heritage. The ghostly figure did not speak, it simply reached out with an expression of profound sorrow and unspoken blame, leaving Vincent shaken to his very core. When he returned to our gathering, his eyes were rimmed with unshed tears, and he murmured, "My sins, my secrets, they have been calling to me all along." That night, as the mansion trembled under the influence of these ancestral voices, I gathered my resolve and decided that I must return to the very heart of my dreams. I sat alone in the silent study, the medallion and pendant resting before me on a faded velvet cloth, and closed my eyes. In the darkness behind my eyelids, I sought out the spectral counsel of my forebears once more. Slowly, the vision coalesced. I found myself in a vast, starlit courtyard, a place that existed outside of time. Around me, luminous figures gathered, their faces shifting between sorrow and gentle kindness. One by one, they approached, their eyes full of unspoken memories. A woman with silver hair, regal and grief-stricken, spoke first. "Child of our blood, our bitterness was born of a love betrayed. Our feud was not simply about power, but about the fear of being unloved and unworthy." Her words, tender yet haunting, unlocked a cascade of recollections in my mind. I saw flashes of a time when our family was whole, when love and honor reigned supreme before the seeds of envy sprouted in secret. Another voice, gruff and laden with regret, interjected. "Our curse was sealed on that fateful night when one among us shattered the fragile bonds of trust. That act of betrayal was not only a personal failing, it was a transgression against the very fabric of our lineage." I struggled to grasp every syllable as the voices merged into a single, resonant chorus, each revealing a piece of a puzzle that spanned generations. When the vision subsided, I was left with a clarity that was both comforting and horrifying. The ancestral voices had revealed that the origin of our curse lay in a series of choices made in fear and isolation, choices that had been compounded over time, until the very essence of our family was steeped in unresolved grief and unhealed wounds. They spoke of the necessity for reconciliation, for a ritual that would demand not only the unburdening of old sins but also the rekindling of a love long lost. The specifics were tantalizingly vague, yet I felt that somewhere within the murk of ancient lore lay the key to breaking the curse. I hurried to share this revelation with Elena and Uncle Vincent. In the flickering glow of the study's solitary lamp, I recounted my vision, describing the courtyard, the luminous figures, and the soft, yet unyielding voices that had bared the truth of our ancestry. Elena listened intently, her eyes reflecting both the terror of what she had experienced and the hope that these revelations might offer a path to liberation. "We must seek out every piece of our family's history," she urged, "every forgotten letter, every hidden diary entry that might confirm what the voices have told us." Vincent, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and resolve, nodded in agreement. "There is one document," he recalled slowly, "a ledger of sorts kept by our ancestors, a record of grievances, of promises made and broken. It is said that this ledger contains a reference to the final component of the ritual, the piece that was missing when our curse was born." His eyes, clouded with the weight of decades, held a hint of the man he once was, a man unafraid to confront his own misdeeds. Our search for this ledger became an obsession. Day after day, we scoured the mansion's forgotten corners, hidden cabinets behind ancient portraits, drawers in dusty side rooms, even secret compartments within the library's walls. The mansion, as if reluctantly yielding its secrets, eventually revealed a small, leather-bound volume tucked away behind a false wall panel. The cover was embossed with symbols that matched those on the medallion and the pendant, and inside, the ledger chronicled not only the transgressions of our forebears but also a cryptic reference to a final ritual component, the Voice of Atonement. The ledger explained that the Voice of Atonement was to be invoked by a descendant who truly understood the pain of the betrayal, a voice that would speak with the authority of both confession and forgiveness. It was not a physical object, but rather a deep, inner realization that must be vocalized in the presence of our ancestral spirits. Only then, the ledger claimed, could the curse be pacified and the relentless cycle of retribution finally brought to an end. Armed with this new knowledge, we returned to the study, our hearts heavy with the magnitude of our mission. The realization that each of us must confront our own inner demons was as terrifying as it was necessary. That very night, as the mansion settled into a fitful slumber punctuated by strange, echoing sounds, I prepared to face the ultimate trial, to let my own guilt and grief rise to the surface and be transformed into a voice of atonement. I sat before the small altar in the study, the medallion and pendant arrayed like silent witnesses to our past. With trembling determination, I began to speak, not in the incantations of old, but in my own voice, raw and unguarded. I recounted every sin, every hidden regret that had been passed down like a cursed inheritance. As my voice wavered in the darkness, I felt the oppressive atmosphere begin to change, the air grew lighter, and a soft luminescence seemed to emanate from the corners of the room. It was then that I heard it, a single, clear note, a voice that was neither male nor female, neither ancient nor modern, but a pure, resonant sound that cut through the silence. The voice spoke in measured tones, echoing back my own confessions with an otherworldly clarity. It was as if the very essence of my remorse had taken on a life of its own, joining with the voices of my ancestors to form a chorus of atonement. In that transcendent moment, I realized that the curse had always been tethered to our inability to forgive ourselves and one another. The voice of atonement was the bridge between our present suffering and the possibility of redemption. I continued my confession, each word more liberating than the last, until the oppressive weight that had burdened my soul began to lift. Elena, who had been quietly watching from the doorway, stepped forward with tears glistening in her eyes. "I, too, must speak my truth," she said, her voice trembling yet resolute. One by one, Uncle Vincent and even the most reticent members of our small band of heirs recounted their own hidden sorrows and regrets. The mansion seemed to listen, its ancient stones softening as if in response to our catharsis. For what felt like an eternity, we poured out the accumulated grief of generations. The spectral energies that had tormented us began to recede, replaced by a gentle, almost tender luminescence. It was as if the ancestral voices, finally appeased by our willingness to confront our collective guilt, had granted us a moment of reprieve, a promise that the curse could be lifted, if only we had the courage to speak our truth. As the night gave way to the soft light of dawn, I felt a quiet peace settle over me, a tentative hope that, at long last, our family's tortured past might yield to the promise of healing. The ledger's words echoed in my mind, only through sincere atonement could we hope to break the chains of betrayal. The journey was far from over, and the scars of our ancestors would not vanish overnight, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was a glimmer of redemption on the horizon. In the days that followed, the mansion's atmosphere transformed subtly. The violent supernatural occurrences diminished, replaced by a gentle, persistent murmur, a kind of whispered lullaby that carried the voices of those who had suffered and, in that suffering, found a way to forgive. Elena, Uncle Vincent, and I began to repair the fractured bonds between us, our shared ordeal forging a new unity that transcended our individual pains. Yet, even as hope blossomed amid the ruins of our cursed legacy, I knew that the final challenge lay ahead, to perform the last step of the ancient ritual. The ledger had spoken of a final incantation, a spoken promise of forgiveness that, once uttered in the presence of our ancestral spirits, would serve as the ultimate act of atonement. In a quiet gathering in the mansion's grand parlor, we arranged the relics one final time, our hearts united in a determination born of both sorrow and hope. I took a deep breath and, with a voice steadied by the strength of our shared confessions, recited the final incantation as recorded in the ancient text. My words, simple yet profound, were an invocation of forgiveness, not only for the transgressions of the past but also for the mistakes that we, as living descendants, continue to make. In that moment, I felt the ancestral voices swell around us, a harmonious chorus that promised the possibility of release from the chains of our heritage. As my final words faded into the hush of the ancient walls, a profound stillness descended over the mansion, a silence that was no longer heavy with sorrow but filled with a quiet, redemptive grace. For the first time in generations, the oppressive shadow of the curse seemed to recede, replaced by the soft glow of atonement and renewal. In that fragile peace, I realized that the voices of our ancestors would always be with us, a reminder of our past, a guide for our future, and a call to remember that even the deepest wounds could, in time, begin to heal. And as the first light of a new day broke through the dusty windows, I vowed that our family's legacy would no longer be one of unending despair but of redemption, hope, and the enduring power of forgiveness. Thus, with the ancestral voices now guiding our steps, we prepared ourselves for whatever lay ahead, knowing that the path to liberation would be long and fraught with challenges, yet bolstered by the promise that even the darkest curse could be lifted by the light of truth and atonement. The pale light of early morning revealed a mansion transformed, not by an end to its sorrow, but by the slow unveiling of deeper, long-hidden truths. Though the ancestral voices had granted us a measure of solace last night, I awoke with a gnawing sense that our journey was far from complete. The revelations of yesterday had peeled away some of the dark shroud that enshrouded our legacy, but with that unburdening came the painful task of confronting the raw wounds that had festered in silence for generations. I rose from my narrow bed with a heavy heart, each step across the creaking wooden floor echoing like a solemn dirge. As I made my way to the parlor where Elena and Uncle Vincent were already waiting, I couldn't help but notice that the corridors seemed to murmur with secrets, whispers of bygone eras that begged to be heard anew. The relics from our previous rites lay on a small table, their presence both a comfort and a reminder of our burden. Yet beneath the calm, a storm of unresolved emotions churned within me, threatening to upend the fragile truce we had brokered with our ancestors. "Elena," I began, my voice low as though reluctant to disturb the fragile peace, "I feel as though the truths we've uncovered are merely the surface. There is so much more to this legacy, so many secrets that even the voices last night hinted at but never fully revealed." Elena, her eyes still glistening from last night's catharsis, nodded slowly. "I've been combing through the documents we salvaged, and I've found references to a love story that seems to have been erased from our official family record. It's as if someone tried to bury it along with the betrayal that cursed us." Her words stirred something deep within me, a mixture of curiosity and a personal, unspoken resentment that I had long tried to suppress. I had always harbored a quiet bitterness towards the family that had, in its relentless pursuit of pride and power, left little room for love or compassion. That resentment, now laid bare by the ghosts of our ancestors, forced me to re-examine my own feelings. Was I prepared to confront not only the external forces that haunted these walls but also the personal demons that had shadowed my every step? Later that morning, we gathered in the dusty recesses of the library once more, our fingers tracing the faded ink of forgotten manuscripts and brittle letters. Among the scattered pages, Elena's fingers brushed against a delicate envelope sealed with a crest that looked unfamiliar. With trembling care, she broke the wax and unfolded a fragile letter, its script elegant and melancholic. "This is a letter from my great-grandmother," Elena whispered, her voice thick with emotion as she read aloud. Asterisk, "My dearest love. I write these words with a heart both full and broken. In the secrecy of our hearts, we dared to dream of a life free from the chains of our family's burdens. Yet, the world around us, steeped in envy and ancient grudges, would never allow our love to flourish without consequence. I fear that in our union lies not only hope but also the very seed of our undoing. Let our love be the light that guides us out of this darkness, even if it must remain forever hidden in the shadows. Asterisk. The raw poignancy of her words sent shivers down my spine. Here was a story of forbidden love, of a passion that defied the rigid confines of our family's expectations, a story that had likely incited the jealousy and betrayal that now festered like an open wound in our lineage. I felt the weight of generations of unspoken longing and sorrow, and for the first time, I began to understand that the curse might have been born not solely out of ambition and greed but also out of a profound failure to honor love and compassion. Uncle Vincent, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. "I remember fragments of this tale," he said, his voice tremulous with regret. "There was a time when our family was not defined by strife alone. My own memories, though clouded by the passing of years, speak of a union that defied expectations, a bond that was seen as an aberration, a threat to our pride. That love, suppressed and then destroyed by fear, may have set in motion the chain of events that led to our downfall." His words carried a sorrow that was almost tangible. I could sense that even he, burdened as he was by his own guilt and shame, wished for a past where love had triumphed over rivalry. The revelation, painful as it was, served as a mirror to my own hidden resentment. I had long felt alienated by a family that prized legacy over compassion, and now I realized that the roots of our curse were intertwined with my own internal struggles, a bitter inheritance of emotional neglect that had festered for far too long. That afternoon, we set out to explore the mansion's estate grounds, a sprawling, overgrown garden that seemed to echo with the laughter and tears of our ancestors. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and as we wandered along a narrow path bordered by ancient statues, I felt as if the very stones were guardians of our past, each one silently testifying to the joys and sorrows that had been interred there. It was in a secluded corner of the garden that Elena's keen eye discovered a stone bench partially hidden by ivy. Carved into its weathered surface was an inscription in Latin, a phrase that, when translated, spoke of a love forbidden yet eternal. I knelt beside the bench, running my fingers over the intricate lettering. In that moment, the garden transformed into a living museum of emotion, every shadow and every faded carving a relic of secrets long buried. The symbolic artifact, in its quiet dignity, became a tangible reminder that even in the midst of betrayal, there existed a yearning for redemption and understanding. The discovery galvanized us to press on, our exploration now imbued with a dual purpose: to unearth every hidden truth about our family's past and to confront the inner demons that had long been lurking in the dark corners of our souls. Our nights became a blend of feverish research and reflective introspection. I spent hours alone in the library, poring over manuscripts, my mind oscillating between anger at the injustice suffered by those who had loved and a deep-seated guilt for my own part in perpetuating our legacy of silence. One evening, as dusk settled over the mansion, I found myself wandering the long corridors in search of a quiet space to think. The walls, heavy with portraits of stern ancestors, seemed to watch my every step, their eyes accusing me for daring to question the order of things. I paused before a grand mirror, its surface tarnished by time. In that reflective glass, I saw not only my own troubled face but also a montage of memories, the echo of my father's cold rebukes, the whispered disappointments of relatives long dead, and the silent, pervasive resentment that I had harbored for so long. In that moment, I realized that to truly understand our family's curse, I had to acknowledge the part one played in its perpetuation. I returned to the parlor where Elena and Uncle Vincent waited in somber silence. With a heavy heart, I began to confess the bitterness that had taken root in me, a resentment born of years of feeling abandoned and misunderstood, of watching our family's legacy be reduced to a series of cold, calculated betrayals. I have always felt like an outsider, I admitted, my voice cracking with emotion. It's as if I was born into a cycle of neglect and spite, a cycle that has poisoned every relationship and every hope for genuine love. I resent that I must bear the weight of a curse that is not solely our ancestors' doing, but also the product of our inability to love and forgive ourselves. Elena reached out, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Your pain is our pain," she murmured softly, her eyes reflecting her own internal struggles. "Perhaps in sharing these feelings, we can begin to heal, not only for our family but for ourselves." Uncle Vincent, his face etched with sorrow and experience, nodded in agreement. "The truth is often a bitter draught, but it is only through acknowledging our darkness that we can hope to dispel it." In the days that followed, our little group embarked on a campaign of self-examination. We held long, difficult conversations in the flickering candlelight of the mansion's drawing room, each confession peeling away layers of long-held grudges. It was a painful process, as memories of old wounds and failures resurfaced with every word. Yet, as we unburdened our souls, the oppressive atmosphere of the mansion began to ease, as if the very walls were relieved to witness the catharsis. Elena, ever the diligent seeker of truth, discovered additional documents tucked away in a forgotten compartment behind an antique armoire. These documents, written in the trembling hand of a distant relative, detailed a secret love affair, a romance that had flourished in defiance of the family's rigid expectations. The letters painted a picture of tender passion intertwined with sorrow. They described clandestine meetings under moonlit skies and promises made with trembling hope. But as the love grew stronger, so did the envy and suspicion of those who could not accept the notion of a union that defied tradition. The ensuing tragedy, as recorded in the letters, was both heart-wrenching and horrifying. The lover was cast out, and the broken promises led to bitter rivalries that would eventually precipitate the dark ritual. Reading these words, I felt as though the mansion's very soul was weeping for a love that had been sacrificed at the altar of pride. The documents not only exposed a hidden chapter of our family's history but also resonated with the personal pain I had felt for so long. I began to understand that our collective curse was not merely an abstract consequence of betrayal, it was the tangible result of hearts that had been hardened, of lives where love was allowed to wither in the shadows of ambition and fear. Armed with this newfound understanding, we convened a final meeting to prepare for what we sensed was the ultimate confrontation with the supernatural force that had tormented our lineage. The mansion, though still haunted by remnants of its dark past, now appeared to us as a battleground where the forces of old enmity and emerging forgiveness would collide. We agreed that the forthcoming ritual, the final act necessary to break the cycle, would demand not only physical courage but also a profound internal transformation. We would have to stand together, acknowledging every scar and every grievance, and offer a collective pledge of reconciliation. In the quiet sanctum of the secret chapel we had once discovered, we arranged the relics and symbols that had been central to our previous rites. The medallion and pendant lay side by side on the altar, their surfaces catching the dim light and reflecting it in spectral patterns on the ancient stone walls. The atmosphere was charged with a palpable tension, a sense that the very air vibrated with the accumulated weight of our ancestors' sorrows and our own unresolved pain. Uncle Vincent, his eyes brimming with a mixture of determination and resignation, addressed us in a voice that trembled with both age and conviction. To proceed, we must each confront the truth of our own hearts. We must unearth every hidden grudge, every secret wound, and transform that bitterness into a voice of absolution. His words, though heavy with the gravity of the past, carried a note of hope that stirred something deep within me. One by one, we stepped forward to speak. I recounted the hidden resentments that had festered in silence, the sense of abandonment, the bitter sting of unmet expectations, and the guilt of feeling undeserving of love. With each confession, I felt the oppressive darkness within me lessen, replaced by a dawning awareness that healing could only begin with honesty. Elena, too, bared her soul, sharing memories of isolation and the constant struggle to be seen for who she truly was rather than for the shadow of our cursed name. Even Uncle Vincent, whose life had been defined by quiet regret, admitted the weight of secrets he had carried for decades. As our voices mingled in that consecrated space, the chapel seemed to come alive with a gentle radiance, a soft, almost imperceptible light that spread slowly across the room. The oppressive air lifted, and for a fleeting moment, I felt as if the ancient curse was yielding to the force of our collective atonement. But just as we began to believe that redemption might be within reach, a sudden chill swept through the chapel. The temperature plummeted, and the candle flames flickered violently as if buffeted by an unseen gust. From the far corner of the room came a low, guttural sound, a warning that our newfound unity had provoked a hostile reaction from the forces that sought to keep the curse alive. Shadows coalesced at the edges of the light, taking on sinister shapes that writhed and twisted with malevolent intent. It was as if the very darkness of our past, unwilling to let go of its hold, had manifested in one final, desperate attempt to thwart our efforts. My heart pounded fiercely as I stepped forward, determined to face this manifestation of our collective pain. "We cannot let fear divide us now," I said, my voice echoing in the vastness of the chapel. "If we stand together, we can overcome even this darkness." Elena's eyes shone with fierce resolve as she joined me at the center of the altar. Uncle Vincent, though his face was etched with worry, nodded in silent agreement. In that critical moment, the supernatural force surged forward, a mass of writhing shadows, screaming with the fury of suppressed anguish. The air vibrated with the sound of clashing energies, and for a terrifying instant, it seemed as if the past and present were colliding in an explosion of spectral violence. I felt the crushing pressure of the force as it pressed against my very being, each tendril of darkness probing for weaknesses. In response, I raised my voice, clear and unyielding, as I repeated the final incantation we had painstakingly pieced together from our ancestors' words. My confession of guilt and my plea for forgiveness mingled in that utterance, forming a barrier of raw, human emotion against the relentless tide of bitterness. In that climactic struggle, time seemed to slow. I saw flashes of our ancestors, their faces a tapestry of sorrow and hope, urging us to persevere. Elena's voice, resolute yet tender, harmonized with mine as we repeated the incantation over and over, each repetition chipping away at the dark mass that threatened to engulf us. Uncle Vincent's hands trembled as he clutched a worn rosary, an heirloom that had witnessed the rise and fall of our family's fortunes, its beads a silent testament to the power of faith and forgiveness. The confrontation stretched on, a grueling battle between the forces of ancient malice and the redemptive power of our united truth. Slowly, inexorably, the shadow began to recede, its shrill cries diminishing into mournful echoes that faded into the stillness of the chapel. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a gentle warmth that radiated from the very stones beneath our feet. When at last the supernatural force dissipated completely, a profound silence settled over the room. In that silence, every beating heart felt the quiet promise of a new beginning, a future where the wounds of the past might finally heal if only we dared to face them. I sank to my knees, overwhelmed by a mixture of relief and lingering sorrow, knowing that the battle had been won but that the scars would remain as reminders of the cost of our redemption. In the aftermath, we remained in the chapel long into the night, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The relics on the altar, now imbued with a soft, steady glow, seemed to whisper of forgiveness and the promise of a less haunted future. I felt, deep in my bones, that the truth we had unearthed was not just a key to breaking the curse but also a path toward healing our fractured souls. That night, as I scribbled the final lines in my journal by the flickering light of a single candle, I wrote, "In confronting our hidden grudges and unspoken sorrows, we have laid the foundation for a redemption that spans both past and present. Our family's legacy is not solely one of betrayal and despair, it is also a testament to the power of truth, of vulnerability, and of the enduring possibility of love." I knew that the journey ahead would remain fraught with challenges and that the scars of our ancestors might never completely vanish. Yet, as I looked upon the faces of Elena and Uncle Vincent, I saw a shared determination, a promise that we would continue to honor our past not as a chain that bound us to misery, but as a lesson that guided us toward a future where forgiveness could bloom in even the darkest soil. Thus, in that sacred space of unburdening and atonement, we resolved to carry forward the hard-won truths of our family's history. We would honor the memory of lost love, acknowledge the weight of every betrayal, and embrace the vulnerability that comes with true reconciliation. In unearthing these truths, we had not only confronted the malevolent forces that had plagued our lineage, but we had also discovered the hidden wellspring of our own resilience. With the first light of dawn seeping through the stained glass windows of the chapel, I rose with a heart both heavy and hopeful. Our mission was far from over, there remained rituals to be completed and wounds to be healed, but in that fragile, radiant moment, I felt that we had taken a decisive step toward reclaiming our legacy. The mansion, once a tomb of despair, now echoed with the soft, steady beat of hope. And as I stepped out into the cool morning air, I vowed that our journey, marked by truth, forgiveness, and the unyielding strength of our shared humanity, would light the way to a future unburdened by the shadows of the past. The storm that had gathered over the mansion seemed to reach its zenith as we prepared to perform the final, perilous act, a ritual that demanded a sacrifice not of blood, but of the deepest emotional burdens we carried. The atmosphere was charged with an intensity that rendered the air itself almost electric, a palpable pressure that weighed down on our hearts and minds. The mansion's ancient walls vibrated with both anticipation and dread, as if it, too, recognized that this was the moment when our cursed legacy would be challenged. It was a night when the sky outside had transformed into a turbulent canvas of swirling gray and lashing rain, the wind howling like a chorus of lost souls. We gathered in the mansion's grand parlor, a room that had once hosted joyous celebrations but was now draped in the solemnity of ritual. Faded portraits of our ancestors, their eyes dark with sorrow and warning, lined the walls. Their silent stares bore into us as though they were judging our worthiness to break the cycle of despair. Elena, Uncle Vincent, and I had already traversed a labyrinth of revelations over the past weeks, the painful confessions, the hidden love, the bitter betrayals, and the haunting voices of those long departed. Each discovery had chipped away at the facade of pride that had defined our family for generations. Now, with the medallion and pendant, a pair of relics that symbolized both our guilt and our hope, placed carefully on a central altar, the final incantation beckoned us to confront our inner demons. I took a deep breath as I stepped forward, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm in my ears. The altar, an imposing slab of stone worn by time, was illuminated by dozens of flickering candles arranged in a precise, almost sacred pattern. Their wavering light cast long, shifting shadows on the walls, as though the very darkness were alive with memories of past transgressions. I could almost hear the whispers of the mansion itself, urging us to be true in our sacrifice. "Elena," I said softly, my voice trembling yet resolute, we must now let go of everything that has weighed us down. The grudges, the secrets, the resentments, they are our true chains. She nodded, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear, hope, and steely determination. Uncle Vincent, his weathered face set in an expression of reluctant acceptance, joined us at the altar. The three of us stood in a silent triad, bound by shared loss and the desperate need for redemption. The ritual began with the recitation of the incantations we had painstakingly pieced together from the ancient ledger, the memoirs, and our own confessions. Elena's voice rose first, a clear, unyielding melody that seemed to merge with the ambient moans of the wind outside. "We lay bare our hearts before you, spirits of our forebears," she intoned, her words resonating against the high ceilings. "We ask forgiveness for the betrayals that have long darkened our path." As her voice mingled with the soft, rhythmic chanting that Uncle Vincent added, an old prayer passed down through generations, a strange phenomenon began to take shape around us. The candle's flames seemed to intensify, their light coalescing into glimmers of spectral luminescence that danced across the room. I felt an almost tangible pull, as if invisible forces were guiding our every gesture. It was as though the mansion itself was drawing a line between past and present, preparing to bear witness to the culmination of our ancestral sins and our own personal atonement. I closed my eyes for a moment, allowing the silence that followed to settle into my bones. In that brief interlude, I allowed my memories to surface, the countless nights spent haunted by visions of our fractured lineage, the echoes of unspoken grief that had defined my every step, and the realization that our family's curse was not a single moment's event but a tapestry woven from years of neglect, betrayal, and the refusal to confront our true selves. When I opened my eyes again, I knew that the next step demanded a sacrifice of my most intimate self, a symbolic act to sever the ties that bound me to the bitterness of the past. Reaching into the folds of my weathered coat, I withdrew a small, faded journal that had belonged to my mother, a relic of a time when love and hope still flourished in our family. The journal's pages, yellowed and fragile, contained her innermost thoughts and dreams, confessions of regret and longing that had been suppressed by a world too harsh to embrace them. It was a testament to the pain of unexpressed emotion, and I understood that by offering this piece of my heart, I could begin to break the cycle of inherited sorrow. With a steadying breath, I placed the journal on the altar next to the medallion and pendant. "I offer you my memories," I said, my voice firm yet laced with the tremor of vulnerability, "all that I have held back in fear of repeating the mistakes of our past. Let these pages be burned in the light of forgiveness, that we may emerge from this darkness unchained." At that moment, Elena stepped forward, her own burden evident in the tear-streaked lines of her face. In a trembling yet resolute gesture, she produced a delicate locket, one that had been hidden away, a family heirloom shrouded in mystery. "This locket," she whispered, "contains a portrait of a love that was forbidden, a love that our ancestors tried to bury in shame. I offer it as a symbol of the hope that even in our deepest sorrow, love endures." With care, she placed the locket beside my journal on the altar. Uncle Vincent, his eyes glistening with a mixture of sorrow and determination, then stepped forward. He retrieved a small, ancient key, a key that had been passed down as a symbol of responsibility and guilt. "I have carried this burden for so long," he murmured, locked away in the recesses of my heart, unable to forgive myself for the part one played in our family's downfall. "Tonight, I release that burden." He set the key gently on the altar, its cold metal reflecting the candlelight in a pattern as intricate as the web of our collective history. The three relics, the journal, the locket, and the key, lay together on the altar like sacred offerings, each one representing a facet of the pain that had defined our lineage. As the incantation reached a crescendo, a deep, resonant hum filled the room, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the mansion. The candle's flames leaped higher, and for a moment, the world around us blurred into a whirl of light and shadow. Suddenly, the supernatural forces we had so long battled began to respond. A gust of wind swept through the parlor, snuffing out some of the candles and sending scattered sparks into the air. The medallion and pendant vibrated in my hands, as if stirred by an unseen current of energy. I could almost hear a chorus of voices, whispers of forgiveness and sorrow, mingling together in an ancient hymn of atonement. In that chaotic moment, the spectral presence that had loomed over the mansion for so long began to manifest more fully. An ethereal figure, draped in tattered robes and emanating a sorrowful light, materialized before us. Its eyes, deep and fathomless, seemed to look into the very soul of our gathered hearts. For a fleeting second, I felt the full weight of centuries of pain, the cumulative burden of every secret, every unspoken betrayal, every suppressed grief. The figure's voice was not heard so much as felt, a vibration that resonated through the floorboards and the very air around us. "You have called upon the ancient powers to break the cycle," it intoned in a language older than memory, each syllable laden with both promise and warning. "The sacrifices you offer are not mere tokens, they are the embodiment of your deepest wounds. To be free, you must relinquish not only your burdens but the very essence of your sorrow." As the words reverberated around the room, a palpable energy surged through us. Elena, Uncle Vincent, and I stood together, our hands touching as if to draw strength from one another. We resumed our incantations, voices trembling but unyielding, and as we did, the figure slowly raised its spectral hand. In response, the relics on the altar began to glow, a soft, pulsing light that spread across the surface of the stone, enveloping our offerings in an aura of sacred fire. For what felt like an eternity, we stood in that moment of reckoning. The air was thick with the scent of burning paper and old memories, and every heartbeat seemed to echo the painful beauty of our collective atonement. In that intense stillness, the supernatural force that had long tormented our family began to wane. The swirling tendrils of shadow that had clung to the edges of the room receded, replaced by a gentle radiance that softened the harsh lines of despair. But even as the immediate terror subsided, I could sense that the process was not yet complete. The figure's eyes, still filled with ancient sorrow, fixed upon me. "Your sacrifice has opened a path to redemption," it whispered, its voice now softer, "but the curse, though weakened, is not yet vanquished. The bonds that tie you to your ancestors' pain remain, and until every heart is truly free of its weight, the darkness will linger." In that moment, I realized that our ritual, this act of symbolic sacrifice, was but one step on a long journey toward liberation. The initial surge of power had indeed subdued the violent manifestations of the curse, the erratic disturbances had given way to an eerie calm, and the mansion itself seemed to exhale a long-held breath of relief. Yet, beneath that fragile peace, a lingering presence remained, a reminder that the forces of our past, though weakened, were not entirely banished. Uncle Vincent stepped forward, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and resignation. "We have done what we can tonight," he said softly, "but our work is far from over. The curse may be held at bay for now, but its roots run deep. Each of us must continue on this path of healing, acknowledging our past even as we strive to build a future unburdened by the sins of our ancestors." Elena's gaze, steady and unyielding despite the tears that shimmered in her eyes, echoed his sentiment. "We have shown that through truth, sacrifice, and forgiveness, we can challenge even the darkest of legacies," she affirmed. "Yet, we must remain vigilant. The forces that we have confronted are patient, and their influence may resurface when we least expect it." I nodded, the gravity of her words resonating within me. I knew that while tonight's ritual had brought a measure of catharsis and a temporary reprieve from the curse's relentless grip, the lingering energies of our past would continue to test us. The medallion and pendant lay on the altar, their glow a quiet promise of hope amidst the ruins of our sorrow. As the candles began to burn low and the spectral figure faded into the dim recesses of the room, I stepped away from the altar and gazed out the tall, arched windows. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving a sky streaked with the soft hues of early dawn. In the distance, I could hear the gentle rustling of leaves and the subtle murmur of the wind, a sound that now carried with it the faint echo of a promise, that even the deepest darkness could, with time and sacrifice, give way to light. I returned to the parlor and joined Elena and Uncle Vincent in a quiet circle, our hands clasped together in silent solidarity. The energy in the room had shifted from one of tumultuous fear to a somber, reflective calm. We understood that tonight's ritual was not the final answer but a crucial turning point, a sacrifice that had opened the door to further healing, even as it left us with the burden of an unresolved presence. In the days that followed, as we resumed our work of unearthing old records and rebuilding the shattered bonds between us, I often found myself pausing to reflect on that night. The memory of the spectral figure's gaze and its solemn words haunted me, a constant reminder that the curse, though momentarily subdued, still lurked in the shadowed corners of our history. It was a presence that demanded our continued vigilance, a lingering force that could, if allowed to fester, reclaim its hold on our family. Yet, in the quiet aftermath of the ritual, I also discovered a renewed strength, a determination to carry forward the legacy of forgiveness and truth that had been forged in the crucible of our shared sacrifice. The ritual had demanded of us not only the unveiling of our hidden grudges but also the courage to lay them down at the altar of redemption. And in that act, I sensed that the path ahead, though fraught with challenges, was also illuminated by the possibility of true healing. That morning, as I stepped out into the crisp air and felt the soft caress of dawn on my skin, I vowed to honor the sacrifices we had made. I promised myself that I would continue to seek the elusive balance between confronting our darkest past and nurturing the fragile hope of a future untainted by bitterness. The curse might not be broken entirely, but tonight, we had achieved something remarkable, a quiet victory against the forces that had haunted us for generations. And so, with a heart both heavy with memory and buoyed by the promise of redemption, I resolved to move forward. The journey was far from over, the lingering presence we sensed was a challenge yet to be met. But as I walked back into the mansion, its ancient walls now bathed in the soft glow of morning, I felt a subtle shift, a stirring that hinted at the possibility that, through continued sacrifice and truth, we might one day be free. The ritual of sacrifice had been our crucible, a night of terror and transcendence that transformed our collective grief into a quiet strength. It had demanded that we relinquish our past in the most intimate way possible, forging a new path from the ashes of betrayal. And though the specter of our curse still hovered at the edges of our reality, there was now a glimmer of light, a promise that even the darkest legacy could be tempered by the redemptive power of love and forgiveness. As the mansion slowly awakened to a new day, I knew that our battle against the lingering curse would be an ongoing struggle. Yet, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I allowed myself to believe that we could, through our unity and our willingness to embrace both the pain and the beauty of our shared history, reshape our destiny. In that quiet, hopeful moment, I pressed my hand to the cool stone of the mansion's wall, as if in silent communion with the spirits of our ancestors. Their voices, once filled with sorrow and regret, now seemed to murmur words of encouragement, a soft, spectral benediction that whispered, "Keep the faith. The journey continues." And so, with the echoes of that sacred night still resonating in our souls, we stepped forward into an uncertain future, united in our resolve, tempered by sacrifice, and driven by the enduring hope that one day, our family's cursed legacy would finally give way to the light of absolution. Thus ended the ritual of sacrifice, a night of unspeakable terror and profound catharsis. The mansion, scarred by centuries of betrayal and sorrow, now bore the marks of our defiance. And though the lingering presence of the curse reminded us that our path was still perilous, we emerged from that darkness with a newfound strength, a resolve to continue unearthing the truths of our past and, ultimately, to forge a future where forgiveness might heal even the deepest wounds. With each step forward, I carried with me the memory of that fateful night, a reminder that true liberation requires sacrifice, and that every soul, no matter how burdened by legacy, holds the power to choose a different destiny. The days after the ritual were filled with a cautious calm, a deceptive reprieve that belied the turmoil still stirring beneath the surface. I awoke on the morning after our night of sacrifice to a hushed mansion, its corridors quieter than before, yet imbued with a palpable heaviness. The air carried a bittersweet chill, as if the echoes of our shared catharsis were intermingled with unspoken questions. Despite the gentle radiance that had bathed our altar during the ritual, I sensed that the remnants of our curse still lingered like a stubborn mist in every shadowed corner. I wandered the silent halls, the sound of my footsteps mingling with the soft rustling of leaves outside, blown in by a cool autumn breeze. There was an unsettling quality in the interplay of light and darkness. Each ray that filtered through the grimy windows seemed to cast shapes that danced at the edge of perception. The mansion, once a relentless adversary of our efforts, now appeared reflective and almost pensive, as if it were contemplating its own role in the tapestry of our family's grief. Yet, in that stillness, a subtle disquiet gnawed at me. That afternoon, while I sat in the parlor attempting to gather my thoughts and pen my reflections in my journal, Elena burst into the room. Her eyes, usually so steady and kind, now held a frantic gleam. "I found something," she whispered, barely able to contain the urgency in her voice. In her hand she clutched a brittle, leather-bound diary, its cover worn and fragile, as if it had been hidden away from prying eyes for decades. "Another entry?" I asked, my voice a blend of hope and trepidation. Elena nodded, carefully unfastening a yellowed slip of paper from between its pages. As she read aloud, her words trembled in the quiet room. "Asterisk, if you believe our efforts have quelled the storm, know this: the ritual was never complete. There remains a final piece, hidden in plain sight, a truth left unsaid by those who dared not confront their own darkest reflections. The curse endures in the lingering silence, waiting for the moment when we, too, will speak its name. Asterisk." Her voice trailed off into a near-silent hush. The implications of the entry struck me like a physical blow. The very thought that our painstaking ritual might have been incomplete reopened a chasm of uncertainty. Had we only subdued the outward fury of the curse, leaving the seed of its malice to fester? Or was it that the full breadth of our atonement was yet to be realized, a missing piece of a puzzle that could forever bind us to this legacy of betrayal? I felt a tremor of disquiet ripple through me. That evening, as twilight seeped into the mansion like ink through parchment, I experienced a vision more intense than any before. I found myself alone in a corridor lined with ancestral portraits. Their eyes, once cold and judgmental, now seemed to shimmer with an ethereal sadness. In the mirror at the corridor's end, I saw not only my own face but the transient reflections of spectral figures, my ancestors, their visages marred by sorrow and regret. Among them, one figure stood out, a woman with a sorrowful gaze, her lips parting as if to whisper a secret. I reached out, desperate to capture her message, but the vision evaporated, leaving only a lingering echo, asterisk, unfinished, always unfinished. Asterisk. The intensity of that personal vision left me shaken. It was as if the mansion itself had found a new voice, a voice that reminded us that while our ritual had calmed the immediate fury of the curse, it had not exorcised every remnant of its malignant power. There was a lingering presence, an unspoken promise of unfinished business that tugged at the edges of my consciousness. Later that night, we gathered once more in the drawing room, a makeshift council of the haunted, where Elena, Uncle Vincent, and I met to debate the meaning of these continued disturbances. The room, lit by a few sputtering candles, was heavy with the residue of our recent sacrifice. Our conversation was subdued, each word chosen carefully as if uttering a name might summon the lingering evil itself. "Elena, what do you make of that final diary entry?" I asked, my voice low. "It implies there is more we must do, something we have overlooked." Elena's eyes were distant as she replied, "I believe it speaks to the intangible, the final truth of our family's curse. We have confronted our own guilt and shed much of our pain, but perhaps we have not truly spoken the name of the darkness that still binds us. It could be that this is a final reckoning, a call to acknowledge every hidden sin and every silent betrayal, not only through ritual, but by naming them, by accepting them fully." Uncle Vincent, whose silence had been a steady undercurrent throughout our ordeal, finally spoke. "I have borne this curse for so many years," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "For decades, I have believed that my presence in Westbury was the anchor holding our family's misfortune. But now I see it more clearly, I can no longer carry this burden. I have decided. I will leave Westbury." His words hung in the room like a death knell. My past, these memories, they weigh on me like chains. I must go, for my own soul's sake. A heavy silence fell over us as Vincent's decision sank in. I felt a pang of regret at the thought of his departure. His guidance and the painful wisdom of his experiences had been invaluable in our quest for redemption. Yet, I understood his need for release, for escape from the relentless specters of our shared past. That very night, as the mansion slumbered under an uneasy peace, I found myself alone once again in my guest room. The room, though dimly lit by the moonlight seeping through the shuttered window, was suffused with an unsettling energy. Every creak of the old floorboards, every murmur of wind outside, carried with it the echo of that final diary entry. I lay in bed, haunted by dreams that felt all too real, a montage of bitter confessions, unfinished rituals, and spectral figures urging me to confront the final truth. In one such dream, I stood in a vast, empty hall where the air vibrated with the voices of my ancestors. Their words, layered and indistinct, rose in a cacophony that eventually coalesced into a single, piercing refrain, asterisk, name us. Claim us. Be free. Asterisk. When I awoke, drenched in sweat and trembling with a mixture of fear and determination, I knew that I could not simply wait for the curse to resolve itself. The lingering shadows of our past were far from banished, they were merely in retreat, biding their time until we faltered. The final incantation, the true name of the darkness, remained unspoken. And without that acknowledgement, the curse would continue to cast its pall over our lives. At breakfast the next morning, the table was set in relative silence. Even as the sun's first rays crept through the dining room's dusty windows, a sense of foreboding lingered in the air. Elena's gaze was fixed on the diary as if it held the answers to questions we were too afraid to ask. Uncle Vincent ate quietly, his decision to leave weighing on him like an unspoken farewell. And I, caught between hope and despair, could not shake the feeling that we were standing at the threshold of another, even more daunting trial. After breakfast, I decided to retrace my steps through the mansion's deepest recesses, searching for clues that might help us complete the ritual once and for all. I wandered through corridors that had witnessed our family's triumphs and tragedies, each step echoing with memories of laughter and lament. In a forgotten corner of the attic, I discovered a small, rusted box concealed behind a stack of old trunks. Inside, I found a collection of personal letters, correspondence that had once been tucked away for fear of the truth they might reveal. One letter, in particular, caught my eye. Its handwriting was delicate yet urgent, and as I read its contents, I realized it was written by the very woman who had spoken of forbidden love so many years ago. In her final lines, she pleaded for someone to name the darkness that devoured our hopes, so that in speaking its name, it might lose its power. The words resonated with a force that sent a shiver down my spine. Was it possible that our failure to name this darkness, to fully acknowledge it in our hearts and minds, was the final missing piece of the ritual? Had we, in our desperate struggle to exorcise the curse, overlooked the simplest yet most profound act of defiance, a declaration of truth that would strip the evil of its mystique? That evening, as the mansion's halls darkened once more and the wind began its mournful wail outside, Elena and I convened in the study to share our findings. The ancient journal entries, the brittle letters, and the final diary excerpt we had unearthed now formed a mosaic of sorrow and hope, a map of our collective past that pointed toward a single, unyielding truth: our legacy could only be broken by confronting the darkness in its entirety. "Elena, I believe our next step is to speak the name," I said, my voice thick with both resolve and trepidation. "We must declare, aloud and unequivocally, every sin, every betrayal that has haunted us. Only then can we hope to shatter its hold." Her eyes met mine with a mixture of fear and determination, as if she too recognized that this was the only way forward. We spent the next few hours preparing, a quiet, methodical process of gathering every shred of our shared history, every whispered secret and every unspoken regret. We wrote down the names of those who had wronged us, of the transgressions that had fractured our family. Each name, each act of betrayal, was etched into paper and read aloud in a slow, deliberate cadence. It was a cathartic exercise, one that left our voices trembling in the dark, yet carried the promise of liberation. As the clock neared midnight, we returned to the grand parlor, where the remnants of our previous ritual still lay scattered, candles half melted, the medallion and pendant resting on the once hallowed altar, now seeming to glow with a gentle, almost imperceptible light. With the manuscript of our confessions and a final diary entry clutched tightly in my hand, I took my place at the center of the room. One by one, we recited the names and the sins, our voices merging into a singular chorus that reverberated off the ancient stone walls. The act of naming was both an exorcism and an embrace, a declaration that we would no longer allow our family's darkest secrets to define us. The air grew thick with energy as each name was spoken, and with every uttered word, I felt as though a great weight was lifting from my soul. For a moment, the silence that followed was profound, a silence pregnant with anticipation. Then, as if in response to our collective act of courage, the room began to tremble softly, the very foundations of the mansion resonating with a low, rhythmic hum. The spectral presence that had haunted our nights seemed to falter, its malevolent force diminished by the power of our spoken truth. Yet even as the tension ebbed, an undercurrent of unease persisted. I could sense that, despite our progress, the darkness was not yet vanquished. It lingered in the corners of our vision, in the half-light of the corridors, waiting for a moment of vulnerability to reassert its hold. The final diary entry had warned us that the curse was incomplete, a warning that our work was not done. The lingering shadows were a reminder that, while we had made great strides toward redemption, the battle was not yet won. In the aftermath of our declaration, I found myself alone in the quiet of the parlor, my mind awash with conflicting emotions. I knew that Uncle Vincent's decision to leave Westbury was both a relief and a sorrow, a necessary step for his own healing, yet a painful acknowledgement that our paths might soon diverge. And I wondered if, in speaking our truths, we had merely delayed the inevitable resurgence of our family's haunted legacy. As I scribbled my final thoughts into my journal that night, I wrote, "In the silence that follows our declarations, I feel both the promise of a new dawn and the chill of lingering shadows. Our voices have echoed through these halls, unraveling the knots of ancient guilt, yet somewhere in the dark, the curse waits, patient and insidious. The truth we have spoken is a beginning, not an end. The darkness, though diminished, is not vanquished, it merely retreats, gathering strength for the moment when we might falter again." In the days that followed, subtle, unsettling occurrences continued to remind us that the curse was still at work. A picture frame would fall from a wall with no apparent cause, the mirror in the hallway would reflect fleeting, distorted images that were not my own, and in the dead of night, I sometimes heard soft, sorrowful whispers echoing through the corridors, as if the mansion itself mourned the unfinished business of our legacy. Elena, ever vigilant and determined, vowed to continue her research, searching for any additional clues that might guide us in the next phase of our journey. "There must be one final piece we have yet to discover," she insisted, poring over ancient documents and faded letters in the library. "Something that will help us understand why the curse lingers, even after our confessions." Her resolve was unshakable, even as I saw the strain in her eyes, a strain born of the realization that our family's story was far from complete. And so, as the mansion's quiet halls held their breath and the lingering shadows danced just beyond the reach of our candlelight, we found ourselves at a crossroads. Our ritual had weakened the curse, and our voices had begun to heal the wounds of the past, yet the final act of absolution remained elusive. The darkness, though forced into retreat, whispered of further trials to come, a promise that our journey toward redemption was a long and uncertain one. In that twilight between despair and hope, I gathered my strength and resolved that we would not allow the curse to dictate our future. Though the specter of our past still loomed, we had taken our first steps toward breaking its hold. With every name spoken, every secret confessed, we had reclaimed a small part of our souls. And even if Uncle Vincent's departure left an aching void, his sacrifice was a reminder that sometimes, to heal, one must let go. As dusk fell on a cool autumn evening, I stepped out into the overgrown garden. The fading light painted the ancient statues and weathered gravestones in soft hues of gold and gray. In the quiet rustle of the wind through the ivy, I felt a sense of renewal, an affirmation that the cycle of despair was not unbreakable. The lingering shadows still whispered their secrets, but now, bolstered by the strength of our shared truth, I felt prepared to face whatever came next. Standing beneath the boughs of a gnarled oak that had witnessed the rise and fall of our family through the ages, I vowed silently to continue the fight, not merely to dispel the darkness of the curse, but to reclaim our legacy from the clutches of betrayal and regret. For in every lingering shadow, I saw the possibility of light, in every whispered sorrow, the promise of redemption. Thus, as I walked back toward the mansion with the echoes of our confession still resonating in my heart, I knew that our journey was far from over. The path ahead would be fraught with challenges and moments of despair, but it would also be illuminated by the strength of our unity and the courage to confront our past. The curse, though wounded, had not been vanquished entirely, and in that truth lay both our burden and our hope. And so, with heavy yet determined steps, we prepared to face the next chapter of our legacy, a chapter where the lingering shadows would either be vanquished by our collective will or serve as a constant reminder of the unfinished business that still demanded our attention. In the silent spaces between our breaths, I promised myself that I would not let the darkness win, no matter how persistent its whispers might be. The journey continued, and as I closed my journal that night, I could almost hear the soft murmur of the mansion, an ancient, sorrowful lullaby urging us onward into the uncertain dawn of a future we had yet to shape. May our voices forever echo in defiance of the shadows, and may every unspoken truth pave the way for a redemption that endures beyond the reach of time. The dawn broke in reluctant hues over Westbury that final morning, casting long, trembling shadows across the mansion's time-worn facade. I awoke to a silence that was not the peaceful quiet of a long-awaited calm, but an uneasy stillness, one that carried the weight of unresolved sorrow and the unyielding presence of ancient curses. The ritual of sacrifice, our arduous quest for redemption, and the haunting confessions of our family's past had left us scarred, transformed, and irrevocably entwined with the mansion's dark legacy. Yet, in the quiet aftermath of our collective catharsis, a truth had emerged: the curse, like the memories of grief and betrayal it embodied, could never be entirely erased. It could only be managed, contained, perhaps even softened with vigilance and forgiveness. I found Elena in the library early that morning, poring over our scattered documents and fragile letters as if trying to catch the remnants of the voices that had once roared through these halls. Her eyes, which once burned with fierce determination, now carried a wistful resignation. We exchanged no words at first. The silence between us was heavy with an unspoken understanding that our journey was evolving into something more nuanced than the grand battles we had waged against the darkness. Later, as the mist rolled in from the overgrown gardens and the ancient oak trees swayed in the chill breeze, we reconvened with Uncle Vincent for what he called our final confrontation. We returned to the secret chamber, a hidden sanctum behind a false wall in the east wing, where we had first discovered relics of our cursed inheritance. The chamber, shrouded in dim amber light from our lanterns, appeared both desolate and defiant, as though it had long awaited our return. Its walls, etched with faded symbols and scrawled inscriptions, whispered of a time when our family's destiny was not yet sealed in torment. As we stepped inside, I could feel the residual energy of past rituals and suppressed regrets swirling like motes in the stagnant air. It was here that the boundaries between the living and the spectral, between truth and memory, had always been most porous. Tonight, however, we had come not to incite further supernatural fury but to confront one final, piercing truth, that the curse would always be a part of us. It was not a monster to be slain but a shadow to be acknowledged, a dark undercurrent to be managed with continuous vigilance. Uncle Vincent cleared his throat, his voice low and hoarse with years of carrying this burden. I have spent decades in this house, believing that I must atone for our sins by my mere presence, that I might hold the curse at bay by being its scapegoat, he confessed, his eyes glistening with tears that carried both sorrow and liberation. But now I see that true peace is not found in exile, but in acceptance. I must leave Westbury, for my own salvation, and to allow you to build something new from the ruins of our past. His words struck me with bittersweet finality, echoing through the chamber like a farewell chime. In that moment, I understood that his departure was not abandonment but an act of self-redemption, a necessary step for him to release the chains that had bound him for so long. The parting was an aching ritual in itself. That evening, beneath the watchful gaze of ancestral portraits and the silent testimony of crumbling stone, we bid him farewell. His footsteps receded down the long, twisting corridor, and as the door closed behind him, the mansion seemed to shudder, a reminder that even as one spirit departed, the collective legacy remained, a persistent echo in every crevice. With Vincent's departure, Elena and I were left to shoulder the responsibility of safeguarding the family's secrets and the fragile peace we had fought so desperately to attain. In the days that followed, we set about restoring what we could of the mansion's battered soul. We mended creaking floorboards, dusted off ancient relics, and, with painstaking care, archived the documents that chronicled our family's troubled history. Yet, even as we labored to breathe new life into the crumbling estate, the sense of uncertainty was ever present, a silent promise that our victory was only temporary, that the shadows, though receded, might one day rise again. One cold, rain-washed evening, as I sat by a small window watching droplets race down the glass, Elena joined me. Her eyes, still reflecting the lingering sorrow of recent trials, met mine with a quiet resolve. "We have done what we could," she whispered. "But I feel that the legacy we carry is not a burden to be cast off. It is our duty to guard it, to understand it, and to let it remind us that even in darkness, there is truth and beauty to be found." Her words resonated deeply, stirring a strange mixture of hope and foreboding within me. That night, as a turbulent wind rattled the shutters and a low, mournful chant seemed to emanate from the very walls of the mansion, I retreated to my guest room with a heavy heart. In the solitude of that dim space, I revisited the journal, the repository of our confessions, our ritual, and our desperate bid for absolution. I reread the final lines we had spoken during the ritual, the words that had echoed like a prayer against the relentless tide of our family's curse. May our voices forever defy the shadows, may our truths be the lanterns that guide us, and may we learn that even in the darkest legacies, the spark of hope endures. In that moment of introspection, I realized that our journey had led us to an uncertain peace, a fragile calm that could be shattered by the slightest misstep, yet was sustained by our unwavering commitment to confronting the past. We had learned that some curses are woven into the fabric of our souls, that not every specter can be banished completely. Rather, they must be acknowledged, understood, and managed, like an old wound that never quite heals but can be tended with care and vigilance. The following days passed in a medley of quiet tasks and hushed conversations. Elena and I took long walks through the overgrown gardens, where the interplay of light and shadow reminded us of the delicate balance between hope and despair. We restored neglected corners of the estate, a forgotten greenhouse, a crumbling fountain, each act of repair a silent promise to preserve the memories of our ancestors while forging a future untainted by their sins. Yet, as we labored, I could not shake the unsettling feeling that our reprieve was merely temporary. In the deep stillness of night, when the mansion seemed to hold its breath, I would often catch a glimpse of movement, a ripple in the darkness, a shadow that flickered at the edge of my vision, and I would wonder if the curse, though weakened, was biding its time. It was in these moments of solitary dread that I felt the full weight of our legacy, as if every creaking floorboard and every whispering draft were a reminder that our battle was not over. One particularly stormy night, when the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls and the rain battered the ancient stone, I sat in the parlor with Elena, reviewing our records and contemplating the future. The flickering candlelight cast distorted shadows upon the walls, and for a long while, the only sound was the soft murmur of our shared thoughts. Then, from the far corner of the room, a subtle, almost imperceptible sound emerged, a faint, rhythmic tapping that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the mansion itself. I froze, my senses straining in the darkness, and for a moment, I was sure I saw the outline of a figure lingering in the periphery. But when I blinked, the figure was gone, leaving only a lingering chill in its wake. Elena's hand found mine, and in that silent gesture, I found a measure of reassurance. "Perhaps it is only our past reminding us of its presence," she said softly, her voice a blend of sadness and resolve. "We must accept that the darkness may always be a part of us, but that does not mean we are its slaves. Her words, though gentle, carried the weight of hard-won wisdom, a conviction born of suffering and the unwavering hope that, even in the face of ancient curses, life could be reclaimed. In the days that followed, our routine became a careful balancing act, an ongoing vigil against the resurgence of old horrors. We resumed our research with renewed determination, documenting every anomaly, every strange occurrence, as if mapping out a blueprint for the future. Each new discovery, however minor, was a reminder that the past was never truly past, that its echoes could always be heard in the silence of the night. One evening, as dusk turned the sky a deep, bruised purple, I sat with Elena in the drawing room, our conversation drifting between memories of our painful rituals and tentative plans for the future. "We cannot promise that the curse will ever be completely gone," I murmured, my gaze fixed on the wavering shadows cast by the candle. "But we can promise to keep watch, to honor the lessons of our past, and to protect what remains of our family's soul." Elena squeezed my hand, her eyes meeting mine with a mixture of sorrow and fierce resolve. "Yes," she agreed, "we must become the guardians of our legacy, keepers of the balance between remembrance and redemption." And so, as the months passed and the mansion slowly began to heal its wounds, a fragile peace settled over Westbury, a peace that was always under threat of being shattered by the resurgence of the old curse. Elena and I, bound together by our shared trials, vowed to maintain a constant vigilance, to continue our research, and to safeguard the secrets that had been passed down through the generations. We became the custodians of our family's story, a story of betrayal and redemption, of pain and hope, an enduring reminder that some legacies are too complex to be wholly banished. In the final days before I recorded these thoughts, a quiet tension had once again descended over the mansion. I walked the long corridors at night, listening for the soft murmur of voices or the distant echo of footsteps that might hint at a hidden presence. Each time, I felt a shiver of uncertainty, a reminder that the past was always near, waiting to resurface when we least expected it. There were moments when I would catch a glimpse of something shifting in the darkness, a movement at the edge of vision, a distortion in the mirror, and in those moments, a chill would seize my heart. One such night, as I stood in the doorway of my guest room, the wind whispering through the trees outside like a lament, I realized that our uncertain peace was not an end but a beginning, a perpetual state of vigilance, of constant renewal. The mansion, with its creaking floors and whispered secrets, was a living testament to the enduring struggle between light and darkness, between memory and oblivion. Our family's curse had not been eradicated, it had been transformed into a solemn reminder of our duty to face the past, to keep its lessons alive, and to ensure that the voices of our ancestors continued to guide us. Now, as I prepare to pen the final lines of this chronicle, I am struck by the uneasy beauty of our journey, a journey that has led us from the depths of despair to the fragile hope of uncertain peace. I close my journal with a heart both heavy and uplifted, aware that our story is but one chapter in an endless cycle of grief and redemption, of sacrifice and rebirth. Our lives, intertwined with the legacy of betrayal and atonement, will always be marked by the lingering shadows of the past. Yet, in that perpetual interplay between darkness and light, there lies a promise that, as long as we remain steadfast in our commitment to truth, forgiveness, and vigilant remembrance, our legacy may yet become a beacon for those who follow. As I gaze out into the murky twilight, I can almost hear the soft echo of an ancient lullaby, a spectral refrain that murmurs, "The journey continues." It is a reminder that while the curse may be managed, it will always linger in the corners of our souls, a constant challenge and an ever-present muse for reflection. And so, with a final, lingering glance at the mansion, a place that has both tormented and transformed us, I embrace the uncertain peace we have earned, even as I acknowledge that the shadows will never be banished entirely. In that bittersweet twilight between what was and what might yet be, I offer these final words as both a benediction and a warning. In the echo of every whispered secret, in the shadow of every long-forgotten betrayal, the legacy endures. Guard your heart, speak your truth, and never cease to be vigilant, for the past is a living, breathing force, ever waiting, ever patient, and always ready to remind you that true peace is not the absence of darkness, but the courage to stand in its light. And with that, our story draws to a close, not with the definitive eradication of our family's curse, but with an uneasy, thought-provoking peace that leaves me, and all who hear this tale, both intrigued and unsettled. The mansion stands as a testament to our struggle, its walls a silent archive of sorrow and hope, and the unresolved mysteries of our legacy whisper promises of possible resurgence in the endless twilight of time. I step away from these memories, my heart heavy with both regret and resolve, knowing that the uncertain peace we have forged is not an end but a new beginning, a perpetual vigil against the forces of the past. As I leave the mansion behind, Elena at my side, I cannot help but feel that the echoes of our ancestors will forever guide our steps, reminding us that in the delicate balance between light and shadow, our journey continues. Thus, in the quiet moments before the first light of a new day, I find solace in the knowledge that while we may never completely escape the legacy of our past, we have chosen to confront it, to honor it, and to transform it into a beacon of cautious hope. And so, with lingering shadows at our backs and the uncertain promise of dawn before us, we step forward, ever watchful, ever brave, and ever determined to ensure that the voices of our past, however unsettling, will never silence the call for redemption. The end.